Disclaimer. This video is part 1 in a 4-part series called Beyond Discovery, a Pikmin Series Retrospective. Beyond Discovery was initially conceived and is being written as a single, cohesive experience. This means that each part in this series is written as though it is part of one large video, despite being separated into multiple smaller videos. This decision has been made to give myself more time and flexibility to ensure this series is of the highest quality possible. Thus, any inconsistencies you may notice in these videos as compared to my other content are most likely because of this approach. That being said, each part is being written with the intent of being able to be enjoyed as its own experience. However, I still suggest watching each video in the order they are released to get the full experience of Beyond Discovery. I'd like to think that everyone has something. That at some point in everyone's life, something speaks to them in a way nothing else could before. I think fiction is powerful in that way, that no matter who you are, you can have a story that speaks to you, whether personally or just as an outlet of entertainment. In some ways, I don't think I could picture my own life or any other life without those stories, but maybe that's just me. In my own life, that something, above all else, has proven itself to be Pikmin, the one series that stuck with me through thick and thin, the only games that I could constantly go back to and never get tired of. These games are special to me, not only because of nostalgia or a connection to the franchise, but because of one specific thing that only these games can capture, and it all harps back to one word: discovery. On October 26, 2001, Pikmin would officially release in Japan for the Nintendo GameCube. On December 3rd of that same year, the game would see its North American release, being one of the first releases on Nintendo's brand new home console. Pikmin had a lot to prove, and with it being the first installment of a completely new game series by industry veteran Shigeru Miyamoto, needless to say, it had enormous shoes to fill. Miyamoto proposed Pikmin as the next Mario or Pokemon, a true heavy-hitting franchise that could stand toe-to-toe with Nintendo's other properties. But why, exactly? Why did he have such confidence in a brand new franchise? Well, to figure that out, let's take a quick step back and look at the inspiration for the game. With the inception of Project Dolphin, Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to take advantage of Nintendo's brand new home console in a unique way. He wanted to see just how many moving parts he could have a game running without breaking the game or compromising the experience. And so, one of the first games for Project Dolphin started development. It was planned to be a sequel to Super Mario 64, titled Super Mario 128. Initially, Mario 128 was actually planned as a Nintendo 64 game, taking advantage of the 64 DD add-on. However, since the DD never really took off in Japan, and plans for a worldwide release were cancelled, 128 was quickly scrapped, only for the name to be reused as Mario's next planned 3D adventure for Nintendo's brand new home console. At Space World 2000, Nintendo officially unveiled Project Dolphin's final name, the Nintendo GameCube. Alongside the announcement of a brand new home console to be released at the start of the millennium, multiple tech demos for the games planned for the system were shown off, one of which was an extremely early look at Super Mario 128. The game showed off 128 different Marios, all interacting with each other on what appeared to be a giant sphere in a floating void. Mario 128 was here to show off the sheer amount of different complex character models, all with different interactions moving fluidly independently of one another. It was extremely impressive for its time, however, it wasn't exactly the direction people were hoping for from a brand new 3D Mario game. And while Nintendo was confident in the project at the time, it didn't take long for the project to be silently cancelled, being retooled into the more traditional but still impressive Super Mario Sunshine. However, Miyamoto wasn't exactly pleased that his concept of 128 independent characters was scrapped. So, he wanted to reuse the technology for a new game. And so, the technology utilized in Super Mario 128 was split among multiple projects, most notably Super Mario Sunshine and eventually Super Mario Galaxy, with the spherical planet physics in that game being an evolution of the landscape shown off in the tech demo. However, one more project was put into works for GameCube. A brand new IP led by Shigeru Miyamoto planned to launch on that system, that game, of course, being the one, the only, Adam and Eve. Oh yeah, my favorite Nintendo story, the Bible. Not much is known about this game, and no footage has ever surfaced, most likely because the game was cancelled super early on in development. However, the initial concept was that the player would take the role of, well, God. It would have been a real-time strategy game that would start with you protecting two humans, Adam and Eve, and watch as human society develops. They were planned to, quote, multiply over time depending on player decisions. The game was deemed too uninteractive to warrant it being a game in the first place, so yet again, the idea for a game taking advantage of over 100 characters was scrapped to the devastation of Miyamoto. Anyone else find it funny that they canceled the game for being not interactive and not, being based on the creation of Now, past this point, it's unclear exactly what happened that led Miyamoto to the idea of Pikmin, but the commonly believed story is as follows. One day, Miyamoto was sitting in his garden, minding his own business, when a group of ants walked by him carrying off one of his strawberries. But instead of being concerned, he was fascinated. He immediately imagined a group of small people carrying the object, wondering about how such small creatures could be so efficient at carrying things so much bigger than themselves. And as the story goes, this lit up a spark. He thought, what if instead of being some omnipotent god controlling hundreds of humans, what if you had to command a massive army of people by yourself? What if you were one of those ants, telling exactly who to carry what to be as efficient as possible? What if something so small, so insignificant to us humans, was made into the most important mission you could have? And so, he pitched the idea for a brand new game, something that took everything the team had learned from Mario 128 and Adam and Eve, and applied it to something completely brand new. Something no one had tried before. Quote, simply put, the idea was something that I came up with while observing ants in my garden, but the reality was a bit more complicated. Even before the Pikmin game came into the world, there were all manner of PC simulations where you'd have to, for instance, choose whether to eat grains of rice or plant them to grow more. I've always wanted to create this kind of gameplay, where you manage things. For example, as a manager in your workplace, you think about who should be given what task to get things done. You have a small project here and a large, resource-heavy project there. And there's this sense of accomplishment when you're able to streamline and manage all of that efficiently. I thought it would be interesting if we could play with this concept in a rich world with many AI-controlled characters. Quote from the Ask the Developer Volume 10 for Pikmin 4. And so, with this pitch, Miyamoto and his team set off to begin development on a game they called Picky. The development team immediately had the vision of a more somber atmosphere, less colorful compared to the worlds of Mario and Zelda. So, with the idea of small creatures exploring nature, and the desire for a more somber tone, Miyamoto suggested that the team watch the movie Fantastic Planet for inspiration, a movie that had supposedly given Miyamoto nightmares as a kid. Fantastic Planet was a 1973 French animated film, and if I can be totally honest with you guys, I couldn't even begin to try and comprehend what the fuck I'm looking at here. Nonetheless, very early on, the team came up with the idea of having the creatures be walking plants in some way. These plant creatures were imagined as small humanoid creatures with different plants growing out of their head, including leaves and dozens of different types of flowers. At the time, the developers called these creatures ipiki, a Japanese word roughly translating to small creature. And as the story goes, Colin Reed, one of the programmers on the project, had mistakenly heard the team saying picky instead. So what was once less of a name and more of an adjective accidentally became the name that the whole development team used for these little guys, even going so far to call the game for the time being Picky. But with English-speaking developers helping out with the project, that name quickly evolved further from Picky, P-I-K-I, into Picky, P-I-C-K-Y. With the name being confused around the office, and with the need to settle on a final name for the creatures, a suggestion was made to use the name Pikmi, since the game would be about the player gathering up the creatures to perform different tasks, so pick me just made sense. But that's more of a phrase, not a name. Plus, calling someone a pick-me has negative connotations in Western culture. So instead, it was suggested to make a name that sounded similar to the phrase, finally settling on the name Pikmin. The game was initially revealed at E3 2001 and later released on October 26th of the same year, only a few weeks after the release of the GameCube in Japan. Over here in the States, the GameCube released on November 18th, while Pikmin released just 2 weeks later on December 3rd alongside Super Smash Bros. Melee, thus ending the troubled development cycle and the beginning of Miyamoto's brand new franchise. The first Pikmin game, to this day, stands the test of time as my second favorite game of all time, and in this in-depth analysis, I plan to explain why. This analysis will mainly focus on the GameCube version of the game. I want to focus on the experience as it was initially released before I cover how it is presented now. That being said, the footage I will use in this video will be taken from the Switch version of the game running on a Nintendo Switch 2. This was done so I could capture the best footage in the clearest possible way. That being said, I do own the original game on GameCube, and I have played that version numerous times, so I know what I'm talking about. The same can be said for the Wii version. I own it, and I've played it. So while I will be discussing the GameCube version through the majority of this analysis, I'm aware of all the little differences between the versions, and will be bringing them up as they are relevant. With all that being said, I'm already 4 pages into this script, and I'm only now beginning to talk about the actual topic. So let's waste no time and analyze how Nintendo accidentally created a perfect game in Pikmin. The basic setup of Pikmin goes as follows. Captain Olimar, captain of the SS Dolphin, is a space traveler from the planet Hakatate. He works for an interplanetary delivery company, so essentially Space Amazon. One day, while flying through space, he's hit by a meteor and crashes onto an unknown planet. 30 parts of his ship are missing, and he only has 30 days of life support to fix his ship and escape the planet. A very sci-fi theme at first, but after the first cutscene, the Pikmin planet is the setting of the whole game, which has an otherworldly yet naturalistic vibe to it. We'll discuss the story more near the end of the video, but for now, this is the setup you need to know. To start off, let's talk about the general gameplay of Pikmin and how I think such a simple formula perfectly encapsulates how masterfully every element of this game works together to create such a tight, well-rounded experience. The controls of Pikmin are relatively simple, but they take good advantage of every single aspect of the GameCube's controller. First, let's start with the simplest controls in Olimar's moveset. There's not much Olimar can do on his own, as without any Pikmin, many buttons become useless. The A button will allow Olimar to punch, dealing virtually 0 damage to enemies. Rapidly punching will slowly deplete an enemy's health bar, but he's really not very strong on his own. The B button will allow Olimar to whistle within a designated radius around his cursor. This will call any Pikmin to his side that fall into the radius. Speaking of the cursor, the left stick is an extremely important aspect to the gameplay of Pikmin. The left stick allows you to, get this, move your character. No game has ever done this, ever. This is some revolutionary shit. However, Pikmin makes use of the left stick in a unique way, as while most 3D games will have your character move at different speeds depending on how far you push in the left stick, Olimar will always move at one constant speed when tilting the control stick in any direction. The interesting part comes in with the cursor movements. The cursor will always be directly in front of Olimar, following his every movement. However, by moving the control stick slightly in a direction, but not all the way, you can control exactly how far away the cursor is from Olimar. Its base distance from Olimar is the furthest it can be. It will remain like this when walking with Olimar. However, when just controlling the cursor by not pushing the stick all the way in, Olimar will turn in the direction of the cursor's location, allowing you to freely move its position in a small circle around him, which enables precise placements when aiming at specific locations. It intuitively allows the player to aim and control their character in a third-person perspective without the use of a mouse or another stick, mainly because the camera and cursor are distinct from each other, but also because the C-stick is used for something else entirely, but we'll get to that later. Pressing the Y-face button will pull up the radar map. This will be important for later gameplay, but for now it holds no significance. The shoulder buttons are used to control the camera. L will put the camera directly behind whatever Olimar is facing. The R button will cycle between 3 different camera distances, super close, medium, and super far, and finally the Z shoulder button will cycle between a normal third-person perspective and a bird's eye view for precise aiming. That's everything you can do without Pikmin. But with them, the controls expand tenfold. The A button will change into throwing the Pikmin closest to Olimar over to wherever the cursor is located at the time. The X button will now disband any Pikmin in your squad, sorting them into type, and of course, the most important difference, the C stick now has a use. In contrast to other games that will use the right stick to control the camera, Pikmin makes the distinction of using the left stick for Olimar and the right stick for the Pikmin, allowing them to move independently of each other when the player tilts the C-stick. This action is what most people call a swarm. It will allow the player to direct their Pikmin squad towards whatever action they need to get done, whether that be carrying, fighting, building, etc. Those are all of the basic controls of Pikmin. However, not all versions of the game are exactly consistent. The biggest difference is the fundamentals of the new play control version for the Wii. For the most part, the actions Olimar and the Pikmin can perform are one-to-one with the GameCube version. However, a staggering difference in the structure of the entire gameplay formula comes from the fact that the cursor and Olimar are entirely distinct on the Wii version. The stick and the nunchuck only control Olimar. The cursor is instead controlled by the Wii Remote's IR sensor, allowing the player to aim simply by pointing at the screen, which allows for the cursor to cover extremely long distances, not intended by the original game. The big drawback to this disconnection between Olimar and the cursor is the fact that the game now connects the cursor and the swarm function. By pressing down on the D-pad, you will be able to swarm your Pikmin in the direction of the cursor. There's no way to control your Pikmin's swarm functionality outside of the location of your cursor in this version, which is in contrast to how the C-stick allows you to do exactly that in the GameCube version. Other than that, however, the controls remain consistent, with just slight alterations to the button layout to account for the Wii Remote's unique design. The biggest change comes from the fact that now, when holding the A button, you can press B to switch the Pikmin type you're holding, something that is surprisingly unavailable in the GameCube version, which is especially weird considering that Pikmin 2 adds this feature on the same console just a few years later using the D-pad. But we're getting way ahead of ourselves with that. The Switch version of Pikmin 1 is almost identical in control to the GameCube version, the big difference yet again being how Swarm works. Instead of the right stick simply being Swarm, the player now has to hold down the L button to activate it. When not holding down L, the right stick will act as camera control like any other 3D game. This aligns the controls with the other Pikmin games on Switch. The ability to switch Pikmin types while holding a Pikmin also returns from the Wii version, this time being mapped to the R button. The Switch version also has motion controls similar to the Wii release. The player has the option to toggle on gyro controls, which will let the cursor be connected to Olimar during normal gameplay. However, when holding A or B to either aim and throw or whistle some Pikmin, the game will allow the use of gyro controls in the controller to change where the cursor is located for a brief time, mimicking the Wii version. But since the cursor is tied to Olimar by default, this luckily doesn't have any effect on the other mechanics like swarming. Truly the best of both worlds in my opinion. Now that we have the basic controls out of the way, let's discuss how Pikmin's unique mechanics work together with these controls to create an intuitive gameplay formula. The mechanics of Pikmin are pretty simple on paper. You use Pikmin to complete tasks. The interesting part of how Pikmin interact with the world is something that I and many others like to call an attention radius, or an AR for short. A Pikmin's AR is integral to how they interact with the environment during gameplay. Pikmin actions can be split up into 3 distinct categories: idle, working, and following. When a Pikmin is idle, its AR is active. The AR is an invisible radius around the Pikmin which dictates what the Pikmin will do. If an interactable object is close enough to the Pikmin, it will go to interact with it. Once interacting, the Pikmin changes to working mode. Whether this be attacking, carrying, or whatever, the Pikmin will no longer be idle and will be focused on the task at hand. It's at this point that its AR will deactivate. Essentially, Pikmin not actively doing anything will automatically go to do whatever action is closest to them. If nothing is nearby, they'll simply stand idle waiting for something to get close. A great example of how this works is how Pikmin carry objects. If a group of Pikmin is carrying something and they pass by an idle Pikmin, that idle Pikmin's attention radius will pick up on the interactable object and will automatically go to help with carrying the object. which makes the process faster. Have Pikmin nearby a bridge that needs to be built, and they will start building. Leave them near an enemy, and they'll automatically start attacking. This makes the game feel of Pikmin as a whole feel intuitive. It lets the player throw Pikmin in a general direction super fast before moving on to another task, because you, as the player, can trust that the Pikmin you threw will start working on whatever task you threw them in the general direction of. Your aim doesn't have to be perfect, and as such, you're allowed to be more lenient with your strategies. While in working mode, the Pikmin's AR will be inactive, and thus it won't get distracted by other possible tasks around them. Once they're done and enter idle mode again, then they may go do something else around them. The general loop of Pikmin AI follows this structure, but what throws it off is this in-between mode of following. When whistling Pikmin to your side, they will enter a following mode. For all intents and purposes, this mode will be what the Pikmin will be in most of the time, and it's pretty similar to working mode. However, unlike working mode, Pikmin will still keep an attention radius while they're following you. This kind of special attention radius is what I like to call a priority attention radius, or PAR for short. A Pikmin's PAR is almost always active no matter their situation. The only exception is when the Pikmin is in working mode, as all forms of attention radius get shut off. However, when in following mode, a Pikmin's AR will be shut off, but not their PAR. Pikmin will follow the player until the player either releases them or throws them. However, if something in the area triggers their PAR, they'll break away from the group to immediately take care of that task without any player input. There are 3 tasks in Pikmin 1 which take advantage of PAR: patches of grass, clusters of rock, and an enemy called the iridescent flint beetle. These act like any other task. It's just something a Pikmin will want to interact with if they're close enough to it. However, these tasks are so distracting that they will cause Pikmin to break away from the player, and in all 3 cases, these tasks are more so fun things to do, not actually something the player genuinely would want the Pikmin to do. More so, these activities are things that are just kind of implied to be things that Pikmin like to do when they get the chance. Just look at the animation for Pikmin plucking out strands of grass. They're not working, they're having fun. The PAR mechanic serves to give more personality to the Pikmin. They won't be taken off of other tasks that they are actively participating in, but they will be drawn to it in pretty much any other scenario. Luckily, there is a purpose to the blades of grass and patches of rock, as Pikmin don't just want to do this to have fun. No, this is their primary method of finding food. Pikmin can discover globs of nectar in the grass or rocks, which when consumed by a Pikmin will allow them to become a flower Pikmin. The amount of Pikmin that can take advantage of one glob of nectar is unlimited. It just depends on how many Pikmin get onto the glob before it's gone. Flower Pikmin are far faster than leaf Pikmin. However, contrary to popular belief, they don't actually get any increase in damage. This is a commonly distributed myth about how the flower mechanic works, but it makes sense because in a way, it's kind of partially true. The amount of damage Pikmin deal is determined by the base stats of the Pikmin type, which we'll discuss later, and the actual hit the Pikmin deals. Okay, let me explain. See, when attacking an enemy, Pikmin will continuously whack the enemy with their leaf, bud, or flower until they either get shaken off or the enemy is defeated. However, when actually attacking, technically, while all Pikmin are dealing the same amount of damage, the flower Pikmin will be attacking at a slightly faster pace, meaning their damage per second will technically make it so the total damage overall is slightly higher. But I said something interesting back there: leaf, bud, or flower. I've mentioned 2 of those, but what's different about a bud Pikmin? Well, there's sort of just an in-between point between leaf and flower. Nothing crazy fast, nothing crazy slow. Despite this, Pikmin still immediately grow flowers upon drinking nectar, so how does one see a bud Pikmin? Well, when a Pikmin gets knocked off an enemy, gets attacked but doesn't die, or just generally experiences peril, they might lose their flower and revert to bud form. Bud Pikmin can also then revert to leaf form. This is a process that when I was little, I used to call deflowering, which was very unfortunate terminology considering it took quite a few years before someone told me what that actually meant. Pikmin can also grow into buds and then flowers if left in the ground long enough, but generally speaking, you'll only really see bud Pikmin when a Pikmin goes down a stage. All of this to say, Pikmin have a lot of personality. Their mechanics work together well to make them intuitive, but not lifeless. They trip over themselves, they get distracted by things they like, but they also work well as tools in the player arsenal, and it makes things all the more upsetting when they bite the dust. So yeah, Pikmin can die. To hazards, to combat, and even to player neglect. We'll discuss these things a bit more when discussing enemy design and Pikmin types, but for now, the important thing is the day mechanic. In-game days last around 13 minutes. You gotta balance getting as much done as possible while also preserving your forces. Any Pikmin not currently at the base or in Olimar's squad will die once the day ends. Whether they're working or idle, it doesn't matter. You need to round up everyone you set to do any task before those 13 minutes are up. This is where the radar comes in. Using this, we can see any and all Pikmin around the map, and when the day is coming to a close, it's important to take a look at this and see just where we need to go to round up all the troops. And that's the thing, you don't actually have to. Losing one Pikmin isn't the end of the world, but it is the end of a life. A digital life, a life that can be replicated 10 times over, but a life. Seeing Pikmin die is heartbreaking. At this point, I've become numb to these things. I've played Pikmin too much to care about every little thing. You have to pick your battles, but something about leaving a Pikmin behind, it's so sad. It's not a death in the heat of battle, it's not a stupid straggling Pikmin picking a fight they can't win, it's just someone you left behind. It was waiting for something to do, hell, maybe it was helping out with a task you asked it to do, and now it's your fault. That's the emotional core of Pikmin from a gameplay perspective. Sometimes a sacrifice is necessary, but when that cutscene plays as you take off without them, and they desperately run towards the onion, you see them struggle, and you see them lose their life because of your mistakes. Speaking of which, let's talk about the onions. The onions are the other side of the Pikmin's mechanics. When they're not on the field, they're in the onion. The onion is able to store Pikmin and make new ones. When carrying back an enemy corpse or a pellet, new Pikmin will be produced from the onion and start to sprout in the ground. The sprouts can be quickly plucked by Olimar by spamming A near a group of sprouts, or, in the Switch version, simply holding A. The onions provide safety for the Pikmin, as even if they aren't in your party, any Pikmin inside the onion or nearby them will be safe at the end of the day. However, there's one interesting quirk to how onions work. So, because of technical capabilities of the GameCube, as well as balancing reasons, only a total of 100 Pikmin can be out on the field at any given point. So if you have 100 Pikmin out, where do the new Pikmin go? They can't be planted in the ground. Well, weirdly enough, these new Pikmin will simply be born inside the onion, forgoing the entire plucking process as a whole, meaning that, for the most part, you really won't be plucking new Pikmin past like day 2. So that whole mechanic of letting Pikmin stay in the ground so they can grow into flowers is essentially pointless, as if nectar wasn't already making it inoptimal on its own. In practice, this works well. It really just makes me wonder why they bothered including the plucking mechanic in the first place. I mean, don't get me wrong, the plucking mechanic is an iconic part of the series. Any Pikmin game without the plucking mechanic wouldn't feel like a Pikmin game. It would just feel wrong. But at the time, this status quo wasn't really established. So it makes me wonder why they felt the need to have Pikmin be plucked in the first place. In any case, I think it works well, it's just a bit of a head-scratcher. So when bringing up Pikmin 1, it's impossible to discuss the game without discussing the day mechanic. As I said earlier, in-game days last around 13 minutes. You have to get as much done in as little time as possible to be efficient in a day, especially because you only have 30 in-game days to complete the game. That means you have just about 6.5 hours to get everything done. What's everything in the game? Just 30 ship parts. It's really not that bad, but I can see how it could be intimidating to a new player. However, for me personally, the 30-day limit is what makes Pikmin 1 so great. It forces the player to plan, to not waste time, to delegate exactly what they want to do at any given moment, and whether or not that action is worth the effort, and especially the time. But it also makes things great from a story perspective, as it gives agency to the player's mission, considering the setup of the game is Olimar crash landing on the planet after being hit by a meteor. Now that we know and understand all the mechanics of Pikmin as an experience, let's get to talking about the actual gameplay of the game. Pikmin serves as a 3D puzzle real-time strategy game, but it's so unique in its approach. All of the mechanics work together brilliantly to create a seamless and balanced experience that just feels compact and well thought out. The game is extremely replayable, trying to get your day count down to as low as possible, coming up with new strategies for getting parts and what enemies are worth fighting and which ones should be avoided. Speaking of which, combat is also super intuitive. There's essentially 3 different ways to approach combat. The easiest and most common is the throwing technique. Just simply throw Pikmin onto an enemy, and they'll latch on and start wailing. Simple enough, but not very effective if you don't have a good trigger finger. Luckily, there's another option. The swarm mechanic. Simply swarming an enemy will let any and all Pikmin in your squad automatically attach themselves to the enemy, assuming they can reach it, that is. Sometimes throwing will be required to even hit the enemy's weak point. The third and final combat strategy is technically not even a strategy at all, that being, just let the Pikmin do it themselves. When dismissing your Pikmin near an enemy, their attention radius will immediately activate and quickly pick up on the interactable object right next to them. So naturally, you get a giant army of Pikmin and just release them all right next to an enemy, and without a second thought, they'll all run to attack it. This is a really fun strategy to pull off well. I especially like to use it on puffy blowhogs, as I'll use some Pikmin to bring it down to earth, and then release the rest to wail on it the moment it hits the ground, without any extra input from me. It can be efficient, but also risky. It's all about a preference and playstyle. Puzzles are also a big part of Pikmin's identity. We'll discuss specifics when we get to the Pikmin types, but figuring out what type of Pikmin to use in any given situation to solve a puzzle is a big part of the gameplay loop and overall integral to the experience. Sometimes you'll have to utilize swarm in unique ways to position your Pikmin in otherwise unreachable areas. You may also have to make use of these sticks and geysers to position the Pikmin and Olimar away from each other. Which, hey, there's another mechanic we haven't mentioned. Sticks are buildable objects that are climbable by all Pikmin, but they can't be accessed by the player. Sticks can be used to get your Pikmin squad into areas Olimar can't reach, and oftentimes to collect ship parts. Olimar can utilize geysers. When he does, the Pikmin that were in his squad will be left behind as he is able to explore a new part of the map. Sticks are obviously far more practical than geysers, but both are little used and often unimportant, so we can move on for now. The gameplay of Pikmin is super fun on paper. How can I discuss how fun the gameplay is if you don't understand how it interacts with the level design, with the enemies, and most importantly, with the Pikmin? Luckily for us, the original Pikmin only has 3 Pikmin types, so there's not too much to dive into just yet. That being said, Pikmin has a ton of complex mechanics that make each Pikmin type unique down to the smallest of details. So let's take a look at each of them. Red Pikmin are the first type we get, and by far the most iconic color of Pikmin. The designs of the Pikmin follow a general structure. Each are small, humanoid plants with a large stem extending from their head. Their entire body is the same color, and their face usually lacks any and all facial features commonly associated with humanoid figures. Pikmin all have 2 eyes and 1 extra facial feature depending on their type. Red Pikmin are the first to show off this unique attribute in their long, pointy nose, a staple of their design and often the first thing someone will think of when discussing the most basic design of a Pikmin. It's simple, but it's cute, and as the series has proven, the lack of a mouth doesn't necessarily mean a lack of expression, but more on that in a second. Red Pikmin are absolutely the best type in the game, but not by a large margin like we'll see with other games in the series. As we'll see as the series goes on, most Pikmin have 2 abilities, an immunity and a special attribute. Despite this later established status quo, Pikmin 1 does not follow this pattern, which we'll see with our other 2 types. That being said, Red Pikmin do follow this formula, and are one of the most consistent types in the series. Their abilities include an immunity to fire and a damage multiplier of 1.5. Being immune to the second most common hazard in the game is a huge leg up on the other types, but not only that, Red Pikmin tend to be the best option for fights in Pikmin 1 to an almost staggering degree. Increasing your damage output by 50% doesn't sound super crazy, but when combined with a gigantic army of reds, they can obliterate any enemy, especially when flowered. Plus, Pikmin 1 serves to be unique compared to the rest of the series, in the fact that fire hazards can kill Pikmin far faster than in the rest of the series. See, when Pikmin are set on fire, in the other games, the player will have about 5 seconds to whistle them back, but in Pikmin 1, the players have less than a single second to save any panicked Pikmin. So reds prove to be essential to dealing with any fire-focused scenario. It's not a super large margin, but again, reds are definitely the best type in the game. However, that doesn't make other types useless. Yellow Pikmin are the second type you'll find, and they're a very interesting case. They serve a pretty important purpose in the overall gameplay loop of this first game, but the actual function they do is completely different from the rest of the series. Yellow Pikmin don't have a nose like reds. Instead, they have large, elf-like ears, which absolutely makes them the most unique Pikmin type in this game aesthetically. Yellow Pikmin have no immunities, as electricity wasn't a hazard in this game. Instead of an immunity, they have the ability to pick up bomb rocks. Their second ability, like Red's extra damage, is a slightly higher throw height. Both of these abilities are extremely situational, making Yellow Pikmin good to have, but not exactly the best all around. Starting with their throw height, very few situations require this ability, but when it is required, the puzzle it's tied to is normally very fun and won't require a ton of yellows anyway. No, Yellow Pikmin are used for their bomb rock ability far more. Bomb rocks help to break down stone walls and even bramble gates with just a few explosions. They also serve to be good for combat, but that usually requires sacrificing the Yellow Pikmin to actually effectively deal damage. In any case, this makes Yellows extremely situational, yes, but also, by a technicality, better at combat than even Red Pikmin. In fact, Yellows are one of the best Pikmin types to use extensively in a speedrun, so do with that information what you will. The Yellows are a very weird case in the whole pantheon of the Pikmin series, which we'll absolutely start to see when discussing other games. Last and maybe least are the Blue Pikmin. These Pikmin have gills on their face which serve the visual function of being a mouth, allowing for more expression in a lot of the franchise's outside media. But it also makes them one of the most basic Pikmin types, having no distinct, outwardly unique feature that would pop up in a silhouette. Blues are another odd case in the whole realm of the Pikmin franchise, with many people considering them to be one of the best types in the entire series, and even more people seeing them as objectively one of the worst. And, funnily enough, both of these arguments usually stem from the exact same point, that being their primary ability, water immunity. Blue Pikmin are the only Pikmin type in this game that can enter the water without drowning. This allows the player to take them across bodies of water and collect things which may be otherwise inaccessible. Blue Pikmin open the game up a lot, and with them being the last type you get, it's easy to see why. Blue Pikmin's secondary ability is just as interesting, however. While Red Pikmin get extra damage and Yellows get a boosted throw, Blues are blessed with the great power of absolutely f***ing nothing. While most Pikmin get an immunity and an ability, Blue Pikmin are stuck with a simple immunity and nothing else. This isn't anything crazy in this game, especially considering that Yellows don't even have an immunity, but as the series goes on, it starts to become more and more evident just how uninteresting Blue Pikmin are in terms of what they can do. That being said, water is the most common hazard in the game, so Blues are absolutely necessary and extremely useful for the entire game. This leads us into an argument that has plagued the Pikmin community since the very formation of the franchise. That being, what makes a Pikmin type good? And on a far wider scale, what makes anything in any game good? Blue Pikmin are commonly considered by new Pikmin fans to be one of the best types in the game simply because of how many areas they can access that other Pikmin types can't. But does that make the Blue Pikmin themselves useful? Does it make their design intuitive? Well, it depends on who you ask. The way I see it, Blue Pikmin can be seen in so many different lights depending on how you're looking at the design philosophy of the game as a whole. But the most common argument I've seen from people who don't like the type is a comparison between Blue Pikmin and a key. See, in a lot of video games, keys are used to open doors, open up paths previously blocked to the player. And yes, sometimes a key may be used to open a path that is essential to the game as a whole, but does that make the key itself a good item? No, right? It's not the key that helped you get there, it's just a necessity. A blockade that the developers put in deliberately to make the player focus on finding a way into the place they really want to go. And in a sense, yes, blue Pikmin are a key to the water in these games, but they don't just get used up like a key. They're still a tool that the player needs to use. Yes, the only unique ability that blue Pikmin have is essentially just walking somewhere other Pikmin can't, but that doesn't mean they can't still be Pikmin. Don't get me wrong, I agree with the sentiment that blues are some of the worst Pikmin in the series, but isn't there a beauty in that? Water serves to block the player off from using any types besides blues. You can't rely on the strength of reds, you can't rely on bomb rocks, you just gotta use your blues to the best of your ability when you're in the water. Blue Pikmin are bad on purpose. They are Pikmin in their most basic form, and I think that's the key to why new players like them so much. Yes, you can look into every little detail in the game and figure out the best Pikmin to use in any given situation, or you could just play the game how you want to play it. At the end of the day, all three Pikmin types are required to beat the game, and whether we realize it or not, Pikmin weirdly gives us the worst Pikmin last, because by this point, we shouldn't need to rely on strength. In fact, when you look at what is strictly needed, despite the fact that reds are great in combat, you don't technically need to use them at all. At the end of the day, any Pikmin can fight. It's almost like the game is teaching the player how to play the game by giving them slightly stronger Pikmin types before forcing the player to be stripped down to the very basics of the gameplay formula that they've spent the entire game getting used to. And to me, that's the point of blue Pikmin. They're not supposed to be good. In fact, you're supposed to believe that they are good. But now that we understand how every Pikmin type works, let's discuss how they interact with the game as a whole. Yup, we're almost an hour into this video, and we're finally going to talk about the gameplay in practice by discussing one of my favorite aspects of any Pikmin game, the areas. The original Pikmin is split up into 5 distinct areas. Ironically, this was the most in series history for a long time, being tied with Pikmin 3, and only being beaten by Pikmin 4's 6 areas. But that's a bit of a misleading statement, since only 3 of these areas are truly fleshed out, fully explorable areas, with the first and last just being a glorified tutorial and boss arena. That being said, Pikmin 1 has an incredible lineup of areas, having some of my favorites from the whole series. So let's discuss each in detail, starting with the impact site is such a weird little area. It has no enemies, kind of. It's the game's tutorial, sort of. It doesn't have much substance, sometimes, and yet it's one of the most iconic areas in the franchise, in a way. The impact site is what makes Pikmin, well, Pikmin, but it's also nothing like the rest of the game. However, putting all that aside, it's still a really great area with a lot to discuss. First, let's discuss the first iteration of the area, the one the player experiences on day 1. This is the point where the player will meet the red Pikmin. After growing their numbers a bit using pellets around the area, they'll push a box out of the way and discover the engine on the other side. The engine is the first part we find in the game. Olimar describes it as the ship's most essential part, and with it, he will be able to take off just above the planet's atmosphere between days. Not much else is said about this part, it's just a simple plot device. Once the player collects the part, the day automatically ends. That's it. That's the entire area in its first iteration. No enemies, simple tutorial, little substance. So how is this iconic? Well, the area changes quite a bit on a revisit. First of all, the landing spot is now flooded with pellets, making the impact site the best area in the game to grind Pikmin on a revisit. Not only that, but a few key enemies start to pop up, namely the iridescent flint beetle. From this point on, as we discuss each area, we'll start to analyze each enemy type and see how they interact with the rest of Pikmin's gameplay. Starting with the flint beetle, this enemy is unique in the fact that it's the only enemy in the whole game that activates a Pikmin's PAR. It's a simple enemy that distracts any idle or following Pikmin, making them endlessly attack the beetle until it burrows. The flint beetle cannot kill Pikmin, and it cannot be killed. It serves only as a distraction. That being said, when throwing a Pikmin directly on the beetle's back, the player will stun the enemy for just a brief second and a reward will pop out of the beetle's shell. It's commonly believed by casual players, and hell, even seasoned veterans, that these rewards are random. because in most other games in the series, they are. However, in Pikmin 1, it surprisingly works a little bit differently. You see, within the time that the beetle remains above ground, the rewards that the player will get will be determined by how many times they can hit the beetle directly before it burrows again. These rewards, in order, are a 1 pellet, 2 globs of nectar, another 2 globs of nectar, then a 5 pellet. These 4 rewards will cycle in this order until the beetle burrows. After going through the loop twice, the beetle will automatically burrow again. These guys appear a decent bit throughout the game, but don't have a huge presence in the gameplay as a whole. The next enemy in this area is the Pearly Clamp, an enemy which only appears in this exact beachy spot in the impact site and nowhere else in the whole entire game. On top of that, they don't reappear in the series until Pikmin 4. That's 2 whole decades without the clam in our lives. This is an outrage, and I will be boycotting Nintendo. The Pearly Clamp, aside from having the goofiest name in a series with an enemy called the Crusted Rum Pump, is yet another very unique enemy in the fact that, at least in this game, you can't kill it. Pearly Clamps contain a pearl in the middle of their shell, which can be attacked like any other enemy in the game. While being attacked, the clam will widen its mouth and eventually clamp down on any Pikmin still inside, eating them in the process. The strategy here is to simply call your Pikmin back right before the clam is about to shut, rinse and repeat until you knock the pearl out of the clam. However, the thing that trips a lot of people up is that knocking out the item inside won't kill the clam itself. You'll still have to call your Pikmin back before the clamp clamps its clam. It's nothing crazy, but it can lead to a major Pikmin loss for new players who aren't familiar with how the enemy works. Luckily, the pearl inside will give 50 Pikmin when taken back, and there are 2 clams with pearls in them, so hey, 100 free Pikmin ain't bad. The third clam contains a ship part called the Positron Generator, which you'll need blue Pikmin to access. Olimar describes the part as a generator with incredible amounts of electricity. He also describes it as running off of solar energy cells. No interesting lore tidbits are found with this part, but don't worry, we'll see plenty of that later. That's the entire impact site in its base form. But the area gets even more interesting as the playthrough goes on. Most players will simply come back to the impact site early on, maybe on day 5 or 6, maybe even 7, but usually you'll have the entire area done before day 8. However, it may be worth waiting until then because starting on day 8, new enemies can spawn. You see this little tree stump here? Well, normally nothing is here, it's just a regular old tree stump with some pellets. But on day 8 and beyond, a boss will spawn here. On even days, the Mamuta will spawn. On odd days, the Gulix will spawn. Some of the easiest bosses in the entire series, but intriguingly, they're also some of the most lore-relevant creatures in the whole series. Starting with the Mamuta, this boss can't actually kill Pikmin, a trait which turns this iconic enemy from a boss into just a regular enemy in every other game, mainly because the standards for what counts as a boss enemy increase dramatically in later entries. In any case, the Mamuta will slam the ground around it with its hands. Any Pikmin caught in the crossfire will not be damaged, but planted, and immediately flowered. The only real challenge comes from having to repluck every Pikmin after they get planted, which can be easier said than done if the Mamuta can plant your whole squad. That being said, it has pitiful health, and is really more of a help than an obstacle. Mamuta are some of the most interesting creatures in the series, as we'll soon see, but this first appearance leaves very little to speculate on or even be suspicious about. Don't worry though, we'll bring this thing up again later. Starting on day 9 and appearing on every odd-numbered day, the Gulix will spawn in the impact site. Yet another easy boss, although this one can kill Pikmin. Interestingly enough, this specific area in the impact site is not only the only place this enemy spawns in this game, it's also the only time this enemy has ever appeared in the entire Pikmin franchise, spin-offs and all. Not once since the series' inception have we ever seen the Gulix again. Even in Pikmin 4, which brought back a ton of underutilized enemies, many of which hadn't been seen since Pikmin 1, even that game didn't bring back the Gulix. There's a mention of the enemy and a few cute references to it, but to this day it stands that the Gulix has only appeared in the first Pikmin game and never again. A title only shared by one other enemy in this game, and only by a technicality. In any case, the Gulix is made entirely of water, so it can only be fought with blue Pikmin. That being said, while the Gulix can kill reds and yellows easily, it has absolutely no way of killing blues, so simply getting an army of blue Pikmin to wail on it is an extremely safe bet. Even so, the Gulix has an ungodly amount of health, to an exhausting degree. However, getting a bunch of blues on one of these orbs and then hitting the other with a single Pikmin will actually cause the two orbs to cling together, dealing massive damage, making this fight a cakewalk with zero stakes. The impact site is such a weird area. On one hand, it's iconic, but on the other hand, who the fuck cares? Well, I care. I love the impact site. It's so cozy and charming, yet mysterious and thought-provoking in just how barren it can be. Plus, its music is so interesting. It's upbeat and bouncy in presentation, but almost uneasy in execution. It's just cozy enough to take you out of the isolationist feel of the game, but it's also not overly solemn. You can get into the vibes of Pikmin as an experience, and you're still able to take Olimar's situation seriously. It's an interesting mix that works well for any point in the game. It feels frantic and worrying, while also leaning into the relaxing vibes of the area. It's a great track to accompany an outstanding beginning area, but wow, does all of this pale in comparison to our next area, the Forest of Hope. Where to begin? First of all, this area fucking shreds. This is Pikmin at its best, and it knows it. The Forest of Hope was used for everything. It's where the box art takes place, it's what the Smash Bros. Brawl stage was based on, and it was shown in pretty much every gameplay trailer for this game. And it introduces virtually all of the most iconic enemies in the entire series, as well as including some of the greatest niche encounters, not only in the original game, but in the series as a whole. The Forest of Hope is incredible, and while I should be saving this detail for the story section, I can't help myself. I need to at least bring up the name right now. The name The Forest of Hope is so unique. Pikmin has a lot of great naming conventions, but one that I wish they would utilize more is this concept of Olimar naming things after his journey. Olimar mentions in the Day 1 notes that he, of course, named the impact site, well, you know, after the site of his impact, but he also mentions that the next area he spots is a deep forest, an area he plans to visit on Day 2 he names the Forest of Hope, as it contains the key to his survival. I love this little detail. It's so in character for Olimar, and it leads to one of the hardest names in the entire series. In fact, the Forest of Hope is referenced in every single game in the franchise in some way or another. The only area in the whole series to hold that title. Being our first full-size area, this one's going to take a bit to discuss, so I'll try and be quick about the layout description. But before we move on to the layout of the area, let's take a brief detour and look at one of the best tracks in all of Pikmin. The background track for the Forest of Hope is incredible. Where to even begin? To this day, the Forest of Hope has one of the best songs, in my opinion, in any game I've ever played. It's so melancholic, it's so peaceful, but it's also frantic. It has a lovely, emotional piano representing the inner workings of Olimar's mind. It feels like a true beginning to the journey, with soft chords overlaid with a hopeful attitude. Here, just take a listen. This is one of the only tracks in the game that outwardly uses piano a lot. We'll see a lot more drums and violin later, but for now, the simplistic tone of this song truly makes it stand out among the rest as one of the greatest area themes. The landing site is in the very middle of the map, with two different walls blocking either exit. One is a bramble gate, which can be knocked down with reds, and the other is a stone wall leading to the back half of the map, which we can't access yet, as we haven't unlocked yellow Pikmin. Speaking of yellows, the front of the map leads to a side path containing the yellow onion and a few bomb rocks, teaching you about the yellow's mechanics. Heading further south, or in the front of the map, brings us to a boss arena. We'll get to that later. Continuing down the side path, we can find a few more parts and access the back half of the map, where we can open a stone wall for the landing site. In the back half, a few more bramble gates wait for us, one of which is blocked by water. Up in the very back, we can find yet another boss arena. More on that later. Finally, the last little pathway in the back of the map leads us to another part. The layout is basic, but it's super fun to interact with, especially once you see just how each enemy and ship part is placed throughout the map. Speaking of which, let's not waste any more time and get to discussing the enemies. The first enemy we ever get to interact with in the whole game waits for us just beyond the initial bramble gate, the Dwarf Bulborb, a simple enemy with a regular bite and eating animation to kill Pikmin. It can be defeated either by regularly latching on and attacking, or it can be insta-killed with a direct hit to the Bulborb's back. I discussed this in my other series, the Biology of the Pikmin series, but I'll briefly bring it up here for anyone unaware because lore-wise, Dwarf Bulborbs aren't actually Bulborbs at all. That's right, Dwarf Bulborbs are a part of an entirely different biological family, the breadbug family. We'll see what an actual breadbug looks like later, but what you need to know now is that Dwarf Bulborbs, despite looking like juvenile Bulborbs, are actually an entirely different species disguised as Bulborb young to receive protection from adults who take them in as their own. Speaking of which, scattered throughout this area are Spotty Bulborbs, the most iconic enemy of the franchise. The Goomba, if you will. Spotty Bulborbs, which are now just referred to as Bulborbs in recent games, are an interesting case in the entirety of Pikmin 1 as an experience. They are the most basic enemy by all means, however, like their dwarf counterpart, they actually only appear here in the Forest of Hope, which is insane to think about considering just how intertwined they are with this game's identity. But that's neither here nor there. Bulborbs are relatively easy to defeat. They will always be asleep until attacked or touched by any object, so sneaking up behind them and swarming your entire squad of Pikmin onto their back effectively takes them down. You can also directly throw Pikmin on them, or even leave a squad idle next to their backside. Really, anything works. Just make sure you get a decently large squad onto the Bulborb's back before it wakes up completely, because once it's awake, it can eat up to 3 Pikmin at a time in quick succession, but it will tend to shake off any Pikmin on its back as often as it can. Normally with a large squad attacking it before it can even wake up, this won't be an issue, since the Pikmin will probably defeat the Bulborb soon after it fully gets up and before it can shake them off. That being said, you'll have a very difficult time getting a large number of Pikmin on the back of any Bulborb that's awake, so it really is best to kill the thing before it can get a chance to shake off any attackers. Interestingly enough, a feature I don't see many people talking about is the other way a Bulborb can wake up. Probably because most players will never see this interaction in the first place. If a Dwarf Bulborb is near a sleeping Spotty Bulborb, it will gain the ability to scream. A dwarf can spot you or any nearby Pikmin, and if you're unable to kill it fast enough, it may scream instead of going to attack you, waking up nearby Spotty Bulborbs. It's a rare interaction, but an interesting one that helps to build up the world and make it feel more alive. All of this aside, Bulborbs are pretty easy to deal with, all things considered, and in most encounters you really won't be losing many Pikmin to these guys. But there is one last method of killing Pikmin that a Bulborb has. Yeah, if you've ever played Pikmin 1 on anything other than Switch, then you absolutely know what I'm talking about. I'm of course referring to the dreaded is a glitch that can occur when you defeat a large enemy in the original Pikmin, specifically in the GameCube and Wii versions, as it was mostly patched out of the Switch release. You see, whenever an enemy dies in this game, their body will fall to the ground in a death animation, turning the creature from an enemy into an object. The issue with this is that the process of changing into an object isn't exactly simple. The properties and hitbox of the thing need to be adjusted on the fly. While this normally isn't a big deal, with large creatures like Bulborbs and especially a certain boss we'll talk about later, the Pikmin that may have been attacking the creature might accidentally get stuck in the creature's hitbox and be pushed, or more accurately, crushed into the ground of the environment. This may put Pikmin under the map, an area they are not supposed to be in. And since the game is hard-coded not to allow anything outside the map, it will instantly make all of those Pikmin disappear. No scream, no ghost, no on-screen indicator of the Pikmin dying, the game will simply remove them from the game. These are counted as deaths, of course, but often it will be a split-second difference where all the player can do is sit and watch as the number at the bottom of the screen drops by 10, 20, 40 Pikmin. It's annoying as hell, and while this was mostly fixed in the Switch version, the engine Pikmin 1 uses is simply incapable of fully patching this oddity out. Pikmin 2 solved this issue using its engine, but re-releases of Pikmin 1 would forever be stuck with some form of the crushing glitch. I've heard stories of people who never saw the crushing glitch in their whole playthrough, but I also have heard stories of people who would constantly lose dozens of Pikmin each time they fall to Bulborb. I feel like it's either not a big deal, or it ruins the game. It's so bizarre. Wow, I just spent a lot of time on one enemy. Let's be quick about the next few, shall we? Male and female shear grubs are simple enemies. Male and female shear grubs are simple enemies that destroy bridges built by Pikmin. Male shear grubs are purple bugs with long fangs that can eat Pikmin, while females are small white bugs that cannot kill Pikmin. You can defeat these guys pretty quickly with a single Pikmin directly thrown on top of them. Although with the large clusters of shear grubs that tend to appear together, it's super easy to lose a few Pikmin to them. These guys appear in two distinct patches in the Forest of Hope, in the back and front of the map, and they appear a lot more later in the game. We'll talk a bit more about them later on. Honeywisps actually also appear in the impact site, but I waited until now to discuss them, as this will be the place where the player first interacts with them. Directly outside of the base camp, a Honeywisp will appear for the first time. These flying enemies won't actually attack Pikmin. Instead, all it takes is one hit to knock them down and have them drop their nectar. A simple enough enemy with a very unique design. Honeywisps will appear out of thin air once the player gets close enough to them, giving them a ghostly, otherworldly feel. I love Honeywisps. They are genuinely one of the best designed enemies in the whole series, in my opinion. Mysterious, otherworldly, but friendly and cute. It's a very Pikmin-feeling Pikmin enemy. Walpoles are uninteresting. Lore-wise, these are the prepubescent form of another enemy, which we'll talk about a bit later. In terms of gameplay, though, they have no means to attack and will simply swim away from you and your blue Pikmin. Essentially useless enemies, but they remain iconic in relation to another one. We'll get to that later. Those are all of the regular enemies in the Forest of Hope. However, there are two bosses we still have to cover. First off, the burrowing Snagret. So, Snagrets are weird in this game. They appear in this cluster of 3 in the front of the map, but you only have to defeat one. This one off to the left. This guy contains a ship part, so it's pretty easy to kill this one, get in, and get out. You could kill the others to grind for more Pikmin, but considering they only drop pellets and not a body like in later games, it's really not worth it. You'd think that maybe the others would be in the way, but no, not really. I mean, this one in the front might trip you up, but generally speaking, you can kinda just walk past it without any trouble. Fighting a Snagret is pretty simple. They only eat 3 Pikmin at a time, and by all intents and purposes, they eat pretty slowly. The real difficulty comes in how this enemy interacts with its environment. The burrowing Snagret will, obviously, fly above the player. No, I'm just f***ing with you, it burrows. When approaching the area where a Snagret resides, it will emerge from the ground and try to surprise you by eating your Pikmin. This is when the boss fight begins. It will continue to burrow and hide, and emerge somewhere else to try and surprise you. However, once it's up and vulnerable, you can throw your Pikmin directly onto its head to latch on and deal pretty decent damage. Pikmin can also latch onto its body, but they will deal very little damage. This is because the body is covered in snake scales, and the head is vulnerable because the bird feathers that cover the head are obviously much more exposed. Which, yeah, you heard me right there. If by some miracle you know nothing about Pikmin and you've been watching this Pikmin video for over an hour without clicking off, then first of all, thank you. But, second of all, yeah, you might be surprised to hear that, lore-wise, the burrowing Snagret is a half-snake, half-bird hybrid creature, living underground and slithering like a snake, but with the head and beak of a bird to pick off prey on the surface. What an icon. Finally, we have the armored cannon beetle, guarding a part in the way back of the map. This boss is an interesting case, as with the Gulix. This one has also never reappeared in the entire series, although unlike the Gulix, it's received a lot of representation via cannon larva and the horned cannon beetle in later entries, so it's not entirely lost. That being said, the Armored Cannon Beetle is an amazing boss, and anyone who adores Pikmin 1 as much as I do can tell you why. It's so unique in its mannerisms. It's a very difficult fight if you don't know what you're doing, but once you figure it out, it becomes less of an uphill struggle and more of a matter of you as the player having to face your fears and take a risk. You see, the Armored Cannon Beetle is just that. It's armored. It cannot be damaged in any way in its base form, so what are you supposed to do? Well, I mean, in this specific instance, you could technically try to steal the part behind it and run out of the area before it can crush any of your Pikmin, but as we'll see later, this isn't the only time we'll be encountering a Cannon Beetle. And the next time, we will have to fight it. So how do we? Well, our opportunity to attack actually comes into play when it attacks. You see, the Armored Cannon Beetle won't try to eat your Pikmin. No, instead this guy will utilize a hazard that no Pikmin are immune to. Well, no Pikmin in this game at least. That being crushing. The beetle will suck in air through its little blowhole here, and after it's done, it will launch a giant boulder through its mouth, instantly killing any Pikmin that get hit by it. So how do we counter this? Well, within the few seconds it takes to suck in air, if we line up in just the right way and throw a Pikmin into its blowhole, this will halt the attack and open its backside, making it completely vulnerable to our attacks. With enough red Pikmin, this thing can go down in one cycle easily, but if not, it can definitely be defeated soon after without much hassle. Now, why is this so interesting? For most Pikmin fans who know exactly how to deal with the beetle, this really isn't anything special, is it? Normally I wouldn't even think about this, I'd just one-cycle the poor thing and move on. But you have to think about this from the perspective of a new player. I think we can all agree that the first time we fought this thing, whether we knew what to do or not, it was scary. One wrong move and you could lose your entire squad. If you don't know what to do, it won't take you long to figure it out, and once you know, it becomes less of a test of strength and more of a test of faith. You have to face the danger head on to conquer it. It's easy to dodge the boulders when standing far away from the boss, but if you want to beat this thing, you'll have to get up in its face. And you know that if you miss, if you screw up, the boulder is going straight through your entire squad. It's an interesting concept, and it forces the player to be reckless in a game all about saving time and resources. It goes against your whole gameplay philosophy up to this point, and I think that's what makes this fight so genius. As a kid, I know I lost dozens of Pikmin to this boss on the Wii version. To be young again and fight the Armored Cannon Beetle in Pikmin New Play Control for the Nintendo Wii on my Wii U running in Wii mode, Gen Alpha will never understand. Moving on to the final aspect of the area, the ship parts. We'll break down each part in terms of how to access them, and then what Olimar has to say about each one. Starting with the Eternal Fuel Dynamo. This part sits directly outside of the base, requiring 40 Pikmin to carry. This is the only real ship part in the game which can be simply collected without any trouble. No puzzle, no enemy, no nothing. It's just sitting there. But that's actually quite genius because the challenge in this part doesn't come from its location, but its weight. 40 Pikmin isn't a crazy amount, but because this is guaranteed to be the first part the player sees after the tutorial, it's completely unavoidable that the player will not immediately have enough Pikmin to even carry it. Since this is the player's main goal, they'll probably try and make a beeline to collect it, but after seeing that it's far too heavy, the player needs to divert their attention to the surrounding pellets and bulborbs to grow their numbers just a bit more. It's an early game method of teaching the player right off the bat that this game won't be that simple. It teaches the player that they need to focus on growing their Pikmin squad just as much as they need to focus on collecting the pieces of their ship. It also diverts the player's attention to the enemies nearby, therefore teaching them how combat works and the reward of more Pikmin that an enemy corpse gives you. All of this being shown to the player through a slight nudge and not told to them in a tutorial box. It gives the player agency right off the bat, showing that the game knows not to treat you like a baby. Do you want to collect this ship part? Well, work for it. What, you thought that 20 Pikmin would be enough to get through the whole game? Think again. It serves as a mini puzzle with the most obvious answer imaginable that makes the player lose all knowledge entirely that they're being taught how the game works. It feels tactile and satisfying, and it slowly prepares the player for the far more complicated puzzles and battles to come. The game doesn't just throw you into the deep end, but it also doesn't stop every 2 seconds for Olimar to say, it seems as though this ship part is too heavy to carry with the Pikmin I currently have. Perhaps I will need to grow some more Pikmin. I will now press the A button and throw my Pikmin to collect the pellets around me. Like, no.
Both of those approaches are fine, but you need a fuel dynamo in the middle to ease the player from baby mode into actually playing the video game. And the funny thing is, all of this analysis, all of this careful consideration for game design took far more time to break down than it takes the player not only to figure out what to do, but to collect the part. Olimar's comments on this part aren't too interesting. He mentions that the dynamo is an electricity source for the dolphin, specifically citing an unlimited energy supply, which makes you wonder what he needs the positron generator for if he already has unlimited energy, but it could just be an over-exaggeration on his part. It's unclear. Either way, nothing interesting lore-wise. Directly past the yellow onion is the whimsical radar, a part which can only be accessed after breaking down a stone gate. This, of course, teaches the player not only how bomb rocks work, but also how multiple Pikmin types will be integral to progressing through the game. Interestingly enough, the radar lies just beyond on a small ledge that either red or yellow Pikmin can reach, which perplexes me a little because you get this part directly after unlocking yellows, and with its very forgiving weight limit of 20, this would have been a great opportunity to show off the yellow's extra throw height, introducing the player to both of the special attributes that yellow Pikmin have right off the bat. Instead, there's no indication until quite a bit later that yellows would even have this ability, aside from Olimar's brief mention of them weighing less, which could be misconstrued as a little lore tidbit and not an important gameplay detail like it actually is. That being said, I get why they would want the first part on a ledge to be a simple one. It teaches the player again about throwing Pikmin towards objects they need to carry, which, should be obvious by this point in the game, but it is technically possible for the player to obtain all previous parts with just the swarm function. So this at least forces the player to interact with the game's other controls. Its most basic control, mind you, but still. Olimar's notes on this one are uninteresting from a lore perspective, but it's very nice to note that by collecting this part, the player will gain access to the radar map, which allows them to track the location of all stray Pikmin and any uncollected parts in the area. A hugely important mechanic, especially for new players. So Olimar's notes here serve as a tutorial for pulling up the map. Nothing crazy, but important. This is also the only part in the entire game which gives the player an actual upgrade of any sort. Sure, collecting a specific amount of parts will unlock new areas, but all in all, every other part serves the same function of just being one step closer to rebuilding the dolphin. This one, however, while also being another step forward, is so interesting in the fact that it actually unlocks something to help the player on the rest of their journey. Plus, with this being such an early part, it almost sets a precedent that this will happen again. That some parts just give you upgrades, and no, that's just not the case. So by technicality, this is the best part in the game because it's the only one that does anything. Ah, the extraordinary bolt. The one thing in the way of most players unlocking the Forest Navel on day 2. Realistically, nothing should stand in the way of obtaining this part, but unfortunately, it's locked behind a stone wall that takes 9 whole bomb rocks to knock down. So quite a lot of new players will unfortunately have trouble obtaining this one right out of the gate. Which is unfortunate because there are just enough parts near the start of the Forest of Hope, including this one, to unlock the next area. It's really not that bad to get, but if you don't plan out your bomb rock usage accordingly, it can unfortunately be a bit of an issue. A patch of sheer grubs block this part. This will probably be the player's first interaction with this enemy. Olimar's notes on this thing, well, I'll just quote him directly. I bought this incredible bolt because the salesman told me of its extraordinary quality that is indiscernible to the average person. Exactly what makes it so extraordinary is a secret, but just look at it. Extraordinary. So remember, even the great Captain Olimar isn't immune to propaganda. Although this part is required to escape the planet, so what do I know, maybe it is extraordinary. This is one of the first real instances of characterization for Olimar, and trust me when I say it will not be the last. Next up is the Nova Blaster, lying directly behind a group of 2 dwarf Bulborbs and a spotty Bulborb. This ship part directly blocks a cluster of bomb rocks and can be taken back through the stone wall shortcut in the base camp. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be taken that way, but do you really want your Pikmin to carry this thing around the entire forest? The Nova Blaster is simply blocked by a few enemies, so there's not much strategy to talk about here. However, what is interesting is that this is our first ship part which is not actually required to beat the game. Yeah, so there are 5 ship parts in the game which are not required for Olimar to leave the planet at the end, this being one of them. We'll cover endings later, but for now, all you need to know is that there are 3 endings. One where you collect all the ship parts, one where you fail to collect them all, and an okay ending where you collect all 25 required ship parts, but somehow can't get all 30 before time runs out. Yet again, more on that later. Olimar's notes on the Nova Blaster are weirdly intriguing. He claims that the brochure he bought the part from claimed that this thing had the firepower to destroy stars and create rifts in the vacuum of space. Okay, 3 things. First of all, I get you're gullible, Olimar, but like, are you for real? Do you actually think this tiny little thing can do all of that? We're talking about Death Star levels of power here. I know advertising stretches the truth a little bit, but come on. Second, hey, Olimar? Why'd you buy this? What were you planning on using this for, Olimar? Remember, Olimar's job is an intergalactic delivery driver. This is like if an Amazon truck rolled up to your house with a rocket launcher strapped to it. And finally, if this thing truly has this much power like you say, then why didn't you use it on the meteor? I don't care if it even has the power you claim to have. It clearly does something if you can confidently say you could blow up a star with it. Like, you've clearly seen it utilized somehow. You have an instant win button. Why didn't you just beam the thing? Our next part is the shock absorber. This part is viewable from the Nova Blaster area, but isn't accessible there. No, instead you'll have to walk past the base camp again over to this ledge. There's a little pool of water blocking the way up, but if you throw some Pikmin up onto the ledge and then walk around, you'll be able to access the area easily. There's only one spotty bulwark blocking the part, so it's not too difficult to grab. Olimar notes that the shock absorber counteracts the shaking and swaying of the ship during flight. Naturally, this is a required part, but not a very memorable one. Oh, the Sagittarius, what a part. First of all, the way you get it is extremely unique. See, you have to build this other bridge on the end of this shore to create a path for the Pikmin to get the part. Now, why the Blues couldn't just get the part and bring it across the pool of water is a mystery I'm sure will never be solved, but for some reason, these guys just simply need a bridge to be built. Now, what's fun about this part is that it actually is possible to obtain without blue Pikmin. On the Wii and Switch version, you can use motion controls to throw red Pikmin just far enough to get over to the other end without dying. It's hard to pull off, but it's possible and essential for speedrunning. You can also do this in the GameCube version, but it requires a lot more precision and ends up being a big time waster, unfortunately, since you just don't have as much range. Of course, it's entirely intended for the player to use blues to get this part, and I would suggest that, unless you're going for a 6-day run, you should just wait until you have blues. That being said, the real interesting thing about this part comes in with Olimar's notes. He states, "My son gave this to me as a present. It brings to mind visions of my son back home on planet Hakatate. Oh, to be back there right now." He then says once you collect the part, "I bet he must be very worried about me." This is our first true instance of characterization for Olimar as a protagonist. With this essentially being a one-man story, things like this give incredible insight into the rest of the world, but more importantly, into our main character. Olimar is a family man. He makes this quite clear. His thought when thinking of his son is not about how much he misses him. No, instead he's worried about how his son is feeling. Olimar knows that he should be back by now. By this point, he's been missing for days, and he's concerned not about his own safety, but about the feelings of his family. He wants to let them know he's okay, but he can't. And that's what really motivates Olimar to get off this planet as fast as he can. Olimar, when it comes to other emotions, is a selfless person. We'll see later how flawed he can be as an individual. For example, he's immensely greedy to a damn near self-destructive degree, but at the end of the day, everything he does for his family. And this tidbit is communicated through small interactions like this. Things that remind him of his son, his wife, his daughter, his dog. He worries for them, not for himself. Other ship parts are described in a tactile way. What does it do? How does it function? But we never figure out what the Sagittarius does. We just know that it reminds him of his son. And the name for the part, the Sagittarius. It's not very descriptive. No, it's named after his son's star sign. I mean, we're talking about a man who makes a living off of traveling space. He's connected to the stars on a fundamental level, so yeah, it makes sense that he might be into some astrological stuff. And he uses that interest to create a connection between his family and his work. It's such a great detail encoded into such a small part of the gameplay of Pikmin. We get to learn so much about Olimar in these little part descriptions and everyday notes. It's such a fun method of storytelling that holds up exceptionally well to this day. It's simple but ingenious, because it also holds up as cryptic in a sense. Speaking of crypticism, what the hell does the Sagittarius even do? It's a required part to beat the game, but we never learn what its function is in the ship. Plus, it was a gift from Olimar's son? There's two different interpretations of this I've seen floating around. First is the more literal interpretation, being that this isn't exactly an integral part of the ship, but more of an aesthetic thing that Olimar attached to the ship after his son gave it to him. I mean, the thing is literally just a gem. It doesn't seem to have any real function. Issue is, why is it required then? Is Olimar just too sentimental to bear leaving the planet without it? I highly doubt that. Another interpretation could be that this thing actually does have some sort of integral function to the ship. In a world where a space laser can be sold in a magazine, I suppose it's not entirely out of the question for Olimar to be gifted a ship part by someone, but his son? It just feels weird, right? I personally prefer the second interpretation, as while the first one might make more sense logically, it doesn't make sense for Olimar as a character. To be unable to leave this behind. Yes, it is important to him, clearly, but it's important to him because it was a gift from his son. If it comes down to returning to his family without it, Olimar would absolutely leave this thing behind. No, I think the part has some sort of real function in the dolphin that we don't see, and considering how small it is, I could believe that his son may have gifted this to him. Considering his daughter gifted him a similar part that we'll get to later, it wouldn't surprise me if these gems were sold in pairs, and the two siblings banded together to save up and get something for their father's ship. Maybe these are solar panels that the positron generator utilizes? Maybe the dolphin used to have faulty panels and Olimar's family surprised him with new ones. It would make a ton of sense, even if it's a bit unrealistic from our perspective to buy an entire part of a spaceship for your dad. Happy Father's Day, Dad! Here's a jet engine! Anyways, no matter how you interpret it, this is a great part. The radiation canopy is very obviously a required part. We've discussed this before, but this is the part that the beetle is guarding in the back of the map. I won't retread on strategies for getting this part because it simply relates to the beetle. However, to get this part, there's some interesting steps you can take. So, what you're supposed to do is wait until you have blue Pikmin and knock down this gate in the river, allowing Olimar to get up and access the boss arena. That being said, you can get other Pikmin into the arena via this ledge here, but you'll need blues to access it. Just kidding, this part is completely available without blues, just like the Sagittarius was. This one takes a little less risk, but in my opinion, this one is actually harder to pull off. See, you have to throw some yellow Pikmin holding bomb rocks onto this ledge. One thing I haven't mentioned about bomb rocks and yellow Pikmin is how the Pikmin's AR changes when they are carrying a bomb. That's right, 16 pages later, I'm bringing up the attention radius again. When throwing a yellow Pikmin holding a bomb rock, their AR will shift its priority for just a few seconds. If a wall of any sort is nearby, they'll run to it to place the bomb by that wall. If an enemy is nearby, they will throw the bomb at the enemy. This isn't how a bomb rock Pikmin's AR always works, however. If you dismiss them, they will not use their bomb. If you throw them somewhere and there's nothing to interact with, they won't use their bomb. A good example of this feature in motion would be if I were to throw a Pikmin with a bomb rock near nothing, it won't do anything. And then, if an enemy walks into that Pikmin's attention radius, it still won't use the rock because it will only intentionally use it on something which lands directly within their AR the moment they land. So, you know, aim cautiously. But what does all of this have to do with the radiation canopy? Well, as I said, when you throw Pikmin up onto this ledge, when landing them at just the right spot, the Pikmin's AR will pick up on the nearby wall and attempt to run and place the bomb. Issue is, if it falls in the water, the rock will disappear, so you have to line them up just right so they'll walk on top of the wall and place it there. That way, the bomb will still activate and damage the wall like we want, and we can call the yellow Pikmin back to us when it inevitably falls in the water. Boom, no blues required. I personally have never been able to pull this glitch off myself, unfortunately, which does, of course, make me a fake fan who knows nothing about Pikmin and has no right to make this video. So, thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Editor's note, When recording footage for this video, I actually was able to pull off this glitch in my most recent playthrough. So, back to it! Olimar describes the radiation canopy as a device which turns the harsh radiation of deep space into soft infrared rays that are easy on the body. Basically, it's his windshield, the little orb that surrounds the cockpit at the top of the ship. Which does bring into question how he's not dead by now, because he ascends to the top of the planet's atmosphere to sleep every night, and like, dog, there's absolutely nothing protecting you from the harsh elements of space. If you use the yellow Pikmin glitch, you can get this part as early as day 2, but even still, what are you doing before then? There's probably an internal part of the ship that he uses. Finally, the last part we need to talk about is the Geiger counter. Oh, the Geiger counter! The birthplace of Pikmin theorizing. How I miss those simple times before alternate timelines, mind manipulation, and space dogs took over the lore. The Geiger counter is in the burrowing snagret in the front of the map. To get there, you'll simply need to break down a stone wall, fight a few bullboard, and push this box. Yet again, you're intended to use blue Pikmin to push it by throwing them from this pool of water, but this part has an even easier solution to obtaining it without blues than any of the other parts we've discussed. This one doesn't require any glitches or advanced techniques. All you need to do is simply throw some Pikmin on top of the box, go inside it, and whistle them over to the other side to push it. Easy peasy. Olimar's notes on this part are interesting. I'll just let him speak for himself this time. Every spaceship needs one of these, but I don't actually know what it's for. Every once in a while it goes wild and lets out a lot of noise, but I never pay much attention to it, so it doesn't do me much good. I should really read that instruction manual one of these days. So, let's talk about this. For those who aren't aware, Geiger counters are real-life devices which are built to detect ionizing radiation in the atmosphere, including alpha particles, beta particles, and even gamma rays. You know, gamma rays? The key component in nuclear radiation. The big thing that, if detected, is evidence of a nuclear fallout. That gamma radiation. And according to Olimar, his Geiger counter constantly goes off, to the point that it's just background noise to him. That's concerning on its own, but if we look at just the part, we can see the device ticking back and forth super fast, implying that it's sensing extreme radiation all around it. And it's not just the forest. Once the counter is attached to the ship, you can see it going off at all times in every single area of the game. The Pikmin planet is covered in radiation. And considering the cardboard boxes, tin cans, the tree stumps, the plastic bottles, it's quite obvious that this planet is Earth. A fact which is straight up confirmed in later games. So not only is this Earth, but it's entirely covered in radiation. Nuclear radiation. And what living creatures are around us? Bugs, which are known to survive nuclear fallouts, weird snake-bird hybrid things, beetles that naturally produce rocks, and most interesting of all, sentient plants. Plants have developed personalities and human-like features to become animals all on their own. It all leads to one conclusion. Pikmin 1 takes place on a post-apocalyptic Earth. At least, that's what it seems like using the information we have in this game. So, for now, we'll go off this assumption until we're inevitably proven wrong in one of these later games. But for now, this little ship part is all we have to piece together the world of Pikmin. So, let's keep this in the back of our minds as we move forward. Whew, that took a while, didn't it? Before we move on to the next area, let's take a look at something else as a little palette cleanser, since I couldn't really find anywhere else to fit this in. The UI in Pikmin is so intuitive. It can be split into 3 distinct sections, each with their own function. The interface we see during regular gameplay contains a section dedicated to time, a section dedicated to Pikmin, and one dedicated to Olimar himself. Let's take a look at that last one first, since it's the most simple one. Olimar's health bar is presented as a little circle like other health bars in the game. He's pretty resilient all things considered, but keeping track of this little health bar is important. It can be refilled by interacting with the dolphin. Olimar's icon is, well, that's him alright. Luckily, this icon gets a complete makeover in later games, but this one, yikes. It really does leave a bit to be desired, doesn't it? The numbers at the bottom of the screen represent your Pikmin count. The first one is how many Pikmin are in your party, the second is the total amount of Pikmin on the field, and the third is, of course, the total amount of Pikmin in the onion and the field. It's simple, unintrusive, and nice to have on screen at all times. It makes keeping track of Pikmin simple, plus it's fun to see the number get bigger and bigger as the game goes on. Finally, the sundial at the top of the screen represents how much time is left in the day. It starts at the left of the screen and will reach the far right of it at the end of the day. These circles represent checkpoints of sorts. The game will notify you that the sun has reached a certain checkpoint by playing a sound effect of a bell ringing, prompting the player to glance up at it and see how much time they have left. It's simple but fairly effective, like the rest of the UI here. Alright, that's all for this introduction. Let's get back to the area discussion with another one of my favorites.
The Forest Navel. Where to begin? If the Forest of Hope was Pikmin at its best, then the Navel is Pikmin in its prime. The Forest of Hope was an incredible area that showed just what made the fundamentals of this game perfect. But the Navel is where we truly see the unique gameplay Pikmin is known for in all of its glory. First of all, the music. The Navel's background track has such a unique vibe compared to everything we've seen so far. It almost feels like the instruments themselves are fighting each other. The impact site was bubbly yet dangerous. The Forest of Hope was melancholic yet hopeful, but the Forest Navel? It keeps intact this trend of two opposing forces, but instead of representing Olimar's feelings in the area, it feels like the hostility of nature is overtaking Olimar's thoughts. The track is bouncy and natural, probably because of the unique inclusion of the talking drum in the back of the track. It feels like a natural part of the environment that's intruding into what the track wants the player to feel in principle. The synth guitar also helps to represent this natural, hostile environment, with the only real break from the hostility being these few bars in the middle of the song. It's probably the only track in the game that I have anything to say about in terms of its musical composition. The others are very vibe-based for me. They feel like they can be played on any instrument because it's the notes that make you feel what the game is trying to get you to feel, but this song is different because the instruments themselves are key to understanding the situation this area is trying to portray through its music. It's a hostile, dark, creepy cave with danger around every turn. So we don't have time to focus on our feelings right now. We have to deal with, nature. And that's what makes this track so great right from the get-go. I'm a bit musically illiterate. Generally, I'm not great at finding the meaning in songs without lyrics. I can analyze writing, but it's hard to analyze a background track like this beyond just vibes. So the fact that I was able to get this much mileage out of this song just goes to show what an amazing job Nintendo did with the composition of this track. They really knew what they were doing. The Forest Navel has an incredible layout in my opinion. Like a lot of Pikmin maps, the player starts near the middle, but what's unique about the Navel is the verticality of the map. The whole thing is like a mountain with multiple layers and many different ways to get up and down them. The player's base is directly in the middle at the very top of the mountain. It's a journey down to the ship parts, which is simple enough, but in order for the Pikmin to carry these up, there are a ton of different paths that can be opened up to help with the climb back up. It's such an interesting concept, and it makes the beginning moments in this area feel hectic and confusing. There are a ton of bomb walls, which can act as shortcuts for the Pikmin, but funny enough, only one wall in the whole area is required to be blown up, being one that blocks off a boss. All the others are just shortcuts, and are rarely worth the hassle, especially considering how rare bomb rocks are in this area. Most of the other paths are blocked by simple bramble gates and bridges, which, with enough multitasking and careful planning, can all be opened pretty quickly, allowing the player more freedom in the area. The actual layout of the area is frankly negligible, as unlike the Forest of Hope, there aren't many crazy connections, so to speak. Most paths simply lead to a part or two, a puzzle, a boss, the standard fare. And this video is long enough as is, so I won't cover every single little shortcut you can make, but I will briefly summarize how the area is structured. The Navel has a very clear-cut front and back. far more defined than the Forest of Hope. The front contains a large pool of water, 2 boss arenas, a big empty beach filled to the brim with enemies, and a path back to the base marked by 2 distinct downward bridges. It's a path I think of the most whenever the Forest Navel comes to mind. The back of the map is mostly empty, just a few pools of water, the closest of which contains the Blue Onion, which means we have now discussed every location for unlocking new Pikmin types. Directly past the Blue Onion is another side path leading back to the front. Essentially, all roads lead to the front, or more accurately, the bottom of the mountain. The one interesting thing in the back of the map is this giant side path containing one of the most interesting puzzles in the game. Although, while it's in the back, the only way to access the path's opening is, you guessed it, the front of the map. The entire area is designed around this giant connection to the front of it, which just makes the actual location of the player's base feel all the more unnatural and interesting. Harping back to the hostility of this area. Let's discuss the enemies, starting with the absolutely iconic Fiery Blowhog. The Fiery Blowhog is interesting because it's completely unable to harm red Pikmin, but it's incredibly dangerous to Olimar and other Pikmin types. As I mentioned earlier, fire is deadly in this game, so it's best to approach these guys with an army of reds, since all the Blowhog's gonna be able to do is shake them off. Just make sure they don't fly into the water. Fiery Blowhogs have a single attack, blowing fire, which, while deadly in its own right, isn't crazy to deal with like I said. Red Pikmin will take care of these guys just fine. The big issue in this area is where the Blowhogs are located. There's a total of 6 of them blocking the entire front of the map. So if you want to use types other than reds, which trust me, you will, then you better take care of them quick. Fiery Blowhogs have interesting lore as well. They are stated to blow a highly combustible phosphor, not fire, and in moderate temperatures, this phosphor will ignite, creating the flames, which the creature gets its namesake from. What fun attention to detail for something that really didn't need to have an explanation. Alright, up next is the bread bug, by far the most beloved creature in the whole series. I wish I could explain why people love this thing so much, but doing so would require countless hours of deep diving into the inner workings of the Pikmin community, which probably deserves its entire own documentary made by someone with a far greater understanding of the human mind than I have. Seriously, anyone who understands psychology, please research the Pikmin community. We are barely even human at this point. Anyways, bread bugs, yeah. The bread bug is such a unique enemy. First of all, starting with lore this time, yes, these are the same kind of creatures that dwarf Bulborbs are, meaning of course that these guys are a part of the same biological family. This is because bread bugs are inherently mimicking creatures, but what I love about this enemy shouldn't come as a surprise to longtime fans of the channel, since I've talked about this enemy at length in the past. The bread bug takes a different approach to being an obstacle to the player, as while other enemies are presented as predators to the Pikmin, bread bugs are presented as competitors. They never outright attack the Pikmin, but they do pose a threat. Bread bugs will wander around the stage trying to find an item to carry back to their nest. Of course, in this game, there's only one bread bug in the whole game, so no matter what, the nest we'll be talking about is this one right near the front of the map. When the bread bug spots an item it can carry, it will make a dash towards it and start dragging it away like the Pikmin would. In this game, the bread bug can only carry items weighing 1 Pikmin, so pellets, sheer grubs, that's basically it. This guy can be a bit of a nuisance, as it will take away pellets fast if you don't do something, but what can you do? Well, as I said, bread bugs are competitors to Pikmin, not predators. So if the way to beat a predator is to attack it back, then the way to beat a competitor is to, well, be competitive. Bread bugs have extremely high defense, only being able to be damaged when a Pikmin lands directly on their back, and even then the damage is minuscule. However, if you're able to set your Pikmin onto an object that a bread bug is carrying already, a tug of war will begin. Just one Pikmin will get overpowered by the bread bug and will cause that Pikmin to be dragged to the nest with the item, killing it instantly. However, setting 2 Pikmin on a pellet or sheer grub body will overpower the bread bug, allowing you to drag the item to the onion. In the process of the item being sucked into the onion, the bread bug will hit its head on the top of the onion, dealing massive damage. So that's how you kill a bread bug. Pretty simple all things considered, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out why this enemy is so incredible. It's game design 101 to pit the player against something with skills similar to themselves at some point in the game. It forces the player to break from their regular strategies and think about how they would defeat themselves. It's always a fun concept to see explored, but it's almost never done with any grace. For every bread bug, you have like 20 Shadow Marios. But that's just it. Bread bugs are done with grace. It makes sense within the context of the game's game's world. It forces the player to think outside the box, and in the end, it shows off yet another unique interpretation of the game's fundamentals. Just when you think you have everything figured out, the Forest Navel hits you over the head with situations that force you to think not like you're playing a game with basic mechanics, but like you're a part of a real ecosystem. It just goes to show how much there is to explore with Pikmin's mechanical ingenuity, especially in relation to the game's world. Next up is the Wollihop. Probably one of, if not the most controversial Pikmin enemy to date for reasons within and surrounding the game. To address the elephant in the room, no, Wollihops were not always called that. Well, kind of. You see, Pikmin used to have a ton of differences across regions. This will become a lot more apparent once we get to Pikmin 2 especially, but as of the ports of Pikmin 1 and 2 on Switch and the release of Pikmin 4, Nintendo has decided to merge any and all version differences to create a single version that all regions can enjoy. This isn't a huge deal, especially in the context of the first game, because when you look at the North American and Japanese releases of Pikmin 1 side by side, you'll notice that there aren't really any differences to speak of, like, at all. No, the real comparisons come into play when we take a look at the European version of Pikmin 1. First of all, for some reason, days last 15 minutes, instead of the regular 13. An extra hour is added to this version of the game's time limit. Not a huge deal, just a weird choice, and in the Switch port, all regions are set to 13-minute days anyway. But there's one other little change that the European version made. It called this here enemy the Wollihop. Now, the Wally part of the name stays the same, but in Japan and North America, that hop at the end was originally a different 3 letters. 3 letters, which are apparently considered a slur in Europe. I'm not gonna say it here just in case it gets YouTube on my case, but my point is that up until very recently, Wollihops weren't called that in other regions, but with the recent push to make all versions the same, the name was changed to Wollihop across all regions. And yeah, at first I was mad at the change, because I spent my entire life calling these guys by a different name. But then I looked up what the word means, and yeah, alright, let's just call them Wollihops. If you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, just look up what Wollihops used to be called. I assume if you've gotten this far into a Pikmin analysis video, you already know, but if you don't, then that's all on you, buddy. I'm 30 pages into this script, I'm not getting demonetized now. Anyways, racial slurs aside, Wollihops are some of the most annoying enemies ever created in any video game. These guys utilize the crushing hazard. Wollihops will attack Pikmin by jumping in the air and landing directly on top of them. Any Pikmin that were under the frog when it lands will die instantly. Now, here's the thing. Most enemies in the game have what's called a death threshold. Essentially, they can only kill so many Pikmin at a time. Bulborbs can eat up to 3 at a time, Snagrets can also eat up to 3 at a time, Dwarf Bulborbs can only eat 1 at a time, some enemies we'll talk about later can get as many as 5, and even for enemies that don't have a death threshold, a lot of times there's a way around their method of attack. Like, the Fiery Blowhog doesn't exactly have a limit to the amount of Pikmin it can set on fire in one attack, but red Pikmin are completely immune to fire, so yeah, if you lose like 30 yellows to a Fiery Blowhog, then that's your own fault. But here's the thing. Wollihops are different. First of all, the hazard of crushing does not have a death threshold, and remember, the only other enemy that uses this hazard is the armored cannon beetle so far, an enemy which can have its attack halted pretty easily, but the Wollihop? Once it's in the air, its attack will happen no matter what, so we just have to prevent it from jumping into the air, right? Well, sure, but that's not exactly safe either. See, by swarming Pikmin around the enemy, they can weigh it down by the feet and prevent it from attacking. But that only works for some time. And if the Wollihop is able to jump, any Pikmin that were at its feet will be stunned for a second or two, most likely directly under it, meaning that they are all likely dead. And since the Wollihop has no death threshold, a single attack could take out every Pikmin you sent to attack it. So, as you can see, these guys can be extremely deadly, especially for a basic enemy. That being said, there is a pretty safe way to fight these guys. By throwing Pikmin directly on top of their head, they'll be able to latch on without getting instantly stunned, allowing you more time to save any Pikmin that may be under the Wollihop. Oh, by the way, did I mention these guys can still kill Pikmin after death? So, there's this fun little quirk with how Pikmin combat works. Most attacking animations, aside from chewing, will briefly keep an enemy from dying, meaning that even if Pikmin are attacking during an enemy's animation and are able to deplete their entire health bar, the enemy won't actually die until that animation is finished. This isn't really an issue since most animations aren't super long, but with the Wollihop, their whole process of jumping in the air counts as an attacking animation. meaning that the moment they start to jump, they cannot die until the moment they hit the ground. So even if the Wallyhop's health bar is completely and totally depleted, they can still kill Pikmin right up until the very last moment. So if you see that a Wallyhop is low health and you think, oh, I can probably just swarm and kill it quickly without an issue, there's a good chance that it will somehow, some way, still enter its jump animation before you can kill it. And while it should already be dead, it's still able to kill like 40 Pikmin because you thought you could kill it quickly before it started its animation. It's infuriating. The Shearwig works exactly like a Sheargrub, except it can fly. So next up is the beady longleg. Shearwigs are an interesting case because they commonly appear alongside male Sheargrubs, working exactly the same as their purple counterpart. However, when a Shearwig's health goes below half, they will start to fly directly above the player. By throwing a Pikmin directly at them while airborne, the Shearwig can be one-shot, but if they stay in the air long enough, they can heal back to full health. Other than that, they work exactly like male Sheargrubs. Now would also be a good time to mention how Sheargrubs interact with water. It kills them for some reason. So next up is the beady longlegs, a boss exclusive to this area who specializes in crush attacks. The beady longlegs can be hit by throwing Pikmin onto its abdomen. All other parts of its body cannot be attacked, but its feet can be held down similar to Wallyhops. It has 4 small feet that stomp down fast and repeatedly. Yellows are the best type for dealing with this thing because of their sheer verticality. Reds also work for extra damage, but I'd suggest just going in with a small group of yellows to avoid mass casualties. I love this boss, especially considering its attacks are far more sporadic than other crushing enemies, which ironically makes them a bit easier to deal with. The small hitboxes and wide open arena allow for the player to more easily control their squad. Plus, you won't have to attack the parts of the body which are dangerous anyways, so just staying in the middle gives the player a good chance of getting a leg up on the longlegs. The Puffstool is the final enemy in this area and functions quite differently from everything we've seen up to this point. See, it doesn't actually attack in any way. Rather, it releases spores which can hit any Pikmin that fall into the cloud it produces. If a Pikmin is hit, then it will turn into a Puffmin, the secret 4th Pikmin type. These guys are just basic Pikmin, which will lock onto Olimar and attack him. After a while, they'll die, but if you whistle them enough, they may be cured. They also get cured if the player is able to defeat the Puffstool before they can die. But generally, you won't actually be interacting with Puffmin because the Puffstool is extremely easy to defeat. If you swarm your squad onto its feet, it'll topple over, giving you a window to attack. It's at this point that the player can throw Pikmin onto its body. It really doesn't have much HP, so you should be able to defeat it within 1 or 2 cycles. Plus, when it gets back up, it does a long animation, giving the player ample time to pull the Pikmin back since it will release spores the moment it finishes that animation. Probably the easiest boss in the game, but as you can see, there's a clear reason why it's a fan favorite. But going back to a little something I mentioned earlier, this guy right here is one of the key perpetrators of the dreaded crushing glitch. Something about his falling over animation just messes with the collision and can be very detrimental to your squad, so be careful, especially on the GameCube version. The Navel has 9 ship parts, each requiring a unique puzzle, strategy, or combat situation, making this area easily one of the most varied in terms of gameplay in the entire game. That said, the number 1 Ionium Jet can just be found lying in a pool of water near the back of the map, but I promise this part is interesting, because it's located next to a few ramps that the Pikmin will have to climb up before going around to the base. It's an easy part to get for sure, but not super simple to bring back. Although, compared to the rest of the area, it's by far the most simple. The Ionium Jet is described by Olimar to be part of a set of jets which help to propel the dolphin into the atmosphere while expelling an odoriferous exhaust. Naturally, it's a required part.
The gravity jumper is another required part that can be found near the front of the map. To access it, you'll have to throw some Pikmin up onto this ledge to build a bridge down. Yellows will work fine, but with some swarming you can also get reds and blues up there pretty easily. Olimar's notes on this part describe it as the final component he needs to jump to super light speed, manipulating the forces of gravity around him. The automatic gear can be found on a super high ledge near the base, but by building this climbing stick, you can have any Pikmin type climb over and carry it away. Probably one of the only required uses of the climbing stick in the game. Olimar's notes say that this essential part makes space travel smooth, but he also mentions that the part has cracks in it, which he subsequently fills with dirt. Surprisingly, this actually works. Moving over to another part that's not required, the space float can be found inside the roaming bread bug. Simply use the strategies discussed earlier to kill it to obtain this part. Olimar says that this part is an absolute necessity for any pilot who lacks the skills to swim in space. He then goes on to say that he has no use for this part since he's an excellent swimmer. Next up is the anti-dioxin filter. Wait, we're going way too fast. Did I just read that correctly? Swimming in space? So, first of all, I'm gonna go ahead and assume he means floating in space, but even so, that's just something you can do in this universe. I guess Hakatations are equipped to handle the harsh atmosphere of space, at least to float around long enough for it to be considered a swim. I suppose their spacesuits would do most of the heavy lifting in that aspect, but even so, why would you want to leave your ship? I suppose if someone falls overboard, the space float is a good way of saving them unless they have the physical capacity to quote-unquote swim back to the ship. I don't know, and I doubt I ever will, since this seems to be just a throwaway line that Nintendo will never bring back up again. The anti-dioxin filter is blocked by 3 Wally hops down in the giant pool of water in the front of the map. Not only that, but this is the first part since the Eternal Fuel Dynamo that requires 40 Pikmin to carry. That means that not only do you need to bring over 40 blue Pikmin down here, but you need to make sure you don't lose them all to the Wally Hops guarding the part. Truly a diabolical situation. I have played this game so much. I've even done multiple randomized runs of the game, and I don't think I have ever seen a single situation where this part is more difficult to get in a randomizer compared to the vanilla game. Even if it spawns objectively harder enemies to fight, the weight of the part is almost always randomized to be lower, and the enemies are never as bad in practice. Especially considering many of them are slow enough comparatively to how fast Wally Hops are, that I can just get the part without ever fighting them. Unironically, this may be one of the hardest parts to get. Olimar says that this part fits over the rocket's exhaust port and filters out all disease-causing agents from the ship's exhaust. That means I'll be able to move around without polluting the planet's atmosphere. I feel worlds better. Aw, look at that. Olimar cares about his carbon footprint. He probably caused some of the most pollution the planet has seen in decades, but it's not his fault. He's just a little guy. The Libra, the second of the gemstone parts. This one is quite a bit more complicated to get, requiring all 3 Pikmin types. In the very back of the map, you can build this super long bridge to get over to this little island. To get to that bridge, you'll have to use Swarm to get around some fire geysers past a bramble gate in the front of the map. To obtain the part, you'll have to throw 15 yellows onto this high ledge, then use some blue Pikmin to open a geyser for Olimar, then Olimar can ride that geyser up, and throw yellows up to the next ledge where they can carry the part down. Then, once the part is fully down, call the yellows back and put reds on the part so they can carry it through the fire geysers. Rather infamously, the Libra will often get caught on the ledge when it's getting carried down. This isn't a huge deal, just a funny glitch that makes it look a little weird. But sometimes, the collision might screw up so bad that the Libra gets flung off the map. If this happens, you'll need to reset the day. It's a rare situation that I've personally never run into, but it does happen. Story-wise, this is of course the counterpart to the Sagittarius we discussed earlier, this time being named after Olimar's daughter and her astrological sign. Olimar's notes on the part says, "My daughter gave this to me. It's named after her astrological sign. My sweet little girl. I wonder what she's doing right at this moment." Like I discussed earlier, Olimar cares deeply about his family. We don't need to retread every single little thing I said before, so I'll save myself the headache and talk specifically about his daughter. Like his son, we don't know much about her, but we can clearly see just how much Olimar cares for her. Later games in the series tell us she's decently young, younger than Olimar's son, that's for sure. And as we'll see later in this game, Olimar is very sentimental, specifically talking about how excited he is to see the people his children will grow into, while also being regretful that his work takes up so much of his time. Especially considering that this whole game is kind of caused by his work. We'll get to this more in the story section. For now, let's move on to the other part blocked by this multi-type puzzle, the analog computer. This part is just beyond the Libra in a small pool of water. So for this one, you'll simply need to have some blues take it out and then have the reds carry it through the fire. Pretty simple. But if you strategize well, it can be extremely satisfying to get both of these parts in one swoop. Olimar describes the computer as not very helpful, but it is required to beat the game, so it's probably pretty important in some ways. It probably acts as like a space GPS, but we don't get much information on that. Olimar specifically states, This strengthens the outward emotions of the dolphin's computer. While it does make the computer smart, it also makes it quick to anger. It's just like my boss. This will be the start of an ongoing joke throughout the series of Olimar comparing the most random things to his boss. Which is funny considering his boss isn't just a faceless character, as he has a pretty important role in the story of Pikmin 2. But that's a discussion for another time. In any case, not much else to say here, so let's move on to the Omega Stabilizer, the part contained by the Puff Stool. As we discussed earlier, the Puff Stool isn't that crazy difficult to take out, but getting the part out of the boss arena is a challenge in itself, as sheer grubs line the path back. And while you could take these out before fighting the Puff Stool, most players won't, because you can just drop down these ledges to get into the arena quickly, but to get out, you'll need to use this zigzagging path upwards. However, once you get it out of that, it shouldn't be too different from a trip from any other part in the front of the map. So there's not much to say about this one, other than what I already said about the boss fight. Olimar's notes say, "I absolutely must have this piece if my battered ship is to ever fly again. It has steered me through countless deep space storms. That, and it looks rather cool. So naturally, this part is required. In fact, this part is actually the covering of the one bottom wing of the dolphin, and much like the radiation canopy or Geiger counter, collecting this part will show it attached to the ship immediately. Just directly to the left of this boss arena is yet another boss arena containing the beady longlegs and the guard satellite. To access this arena, you'll need to blow up this stone wall. The only stone wall that's actually required to break in this whole area. Like I said, the guard satellite is your reward for beating the beady longlegs. It's a pretty light part, and it's required to beat the game. Olimar's notes on the satellite describe it as a sort of automated defense system to alert and guard from the dangers of deep space. And yet, it couldn't save him from the meteor. He also goes on to say that the guard satellite has, quote, protected me from space pirates many, many times. So we have space swimming, space Amazon, and now we have space pirates. This is the first and only time that space pirates are mentioned in the whole series. It's clearly just a throwaway gag, but the concept of little old Olimar getting jumped in the middle of deep space is too funny not to bring up, considering this man is literally a delivery driver. It's easy to forget considering the rest of the series goes in the direction of him studying this planet, but remember, this guy actually happened upon this planet while just being a delivery driver. Could you imagine if the local Amazon guy just got jumped and mugged? Now imagine that happening in the endless void of space. Olimar does not get paid enough for this. This man is working minimum wage to risk his life every day, and that's not even counting the events of this game. The guard satellite is another visual part. It'll simply float beside the ship, which is a cool visual in my opinion. I know some people think this is a bit lazy, but I think it makes sense that a mini satellite floats around the ship. It adds personality. Alright, 3 areas down, 2 to go. Let's take a short break and discuss another part of the game, the challenge mode. I mean, it's alright. Challenge mode in this game isn't great. It's just a simple timed challenge to see how many Pikmin you can grow in remixed versions of all the areas. Some of these remixes are neat, but none of them are groundbreaking. Mainly just enemy positions you wouldn't normally expect. It's alright and a decently fun time, but it doesn't feel worthwhile, because it cuts out half the point of the gameplay loop of Pikmin. You're not collecting anything. See, the reason why growing Pikmin feels so rewarding in the main game is because the more Pikmin you have, the more you can do, and the faster you can get it done. Your main goal is of course still collecting the ship parts, but you need a sizable squad to effectively collect them all. In this challenge mode, you simply grow Pikmin for the sake of a high score, which just doesn't scratch the same itch, you know? It's not like it's not well designed, it just doesn't feel satisfying. Other challenge modes in the series are integral parts of those experiences, because they give you a similar goal of collecting as much as you can in a time limit with either a limited amount of Pikmin or a small group which you can grow if you want to. This way, the strategy comes from designating tasks and figuring out how many Pikmin you need to accomplish everything efficiently. Challenge mode is iconic in the whole pantheon of the Pikmin series, but it really didn't get off to the best start. Which is a shame, because the main game knocked its gameplay loop out of the park. They nailed the formula on their first try, and to this day, what Pikmin 1 established in its main game is still the foundation for what a Pikmin experience is. Not many other series can say that. So it kinda sucks to see such an iconic mode being so dated and lackluster in its first incarnation. That being said, it's not bad, and I could see myself having fun with this mode if there was nothing better to compare it to. It's just, whenever you boot up Pikmin 1 Challenge mode, all you can think is, wow, this is cool, but you know what would be far more fun? If I was playing Pikmin 3 Challenge mode instead, which again is not something I find myself saying about any other aspect of this first game. The main story mode truly holds up, so let's get back to talking about it with our next area. The Distant Spring is so weird. It's definitely the biggest area in the game, but it relies so heavily on blue Pikmin that it feels so condensed. There's a lot to like about this area. For one, the vibes are immaculate. It's so serene and weirdly beautiful. But it's also really eerie. For an area that's so large, it feels largely devoid of life. That's not to say there aren't enemies, there definitely are, but while the Forest Navel feels like a constantly chaotic and hostile environment, and the Forest of Hope feels like a calm, bustling ecosystem, the Distant Spring feels empty, yet distinctly alive. It feels like you're being stalked at all times, like you're invading a sacred place, somewhere with a status quo where the wildlife isn't too pleased with your disruption. The music is certainly what solidifies this vibe in my mind. This track continues with the theme the Navel established, of the music feeling like a natural extension of the environment. It's interesting how the first half of the game has a very clearly orchestral feeling music, probably to represent Olimar's thoughts and headspace. But the back half of the game puts that control in the hands of the ecosystem, maybe to represent the planet overpowering Olimar's will. He can't focus on his feelings. He needs to embrace this place if he wants to escape it. That's just my interpretation, though. The Distant Springs track isn't the best on its own. Like I said, it has a similar style to the Forest Navel, but instead of feeling like a music track with soft, natural vibes, this one feels more fundamentally natural with a musical tone to it. It works well for the vibe of the area, but it's not a track I would listen to outside of the context of the game like the Forest of Hope. Here, take a listen. See what I mean? I can't easily pick out the instrument choices in this one. It's a nice vibe, I suppose, but it doesn't work anywhere other than the Distant Spring. Okay, I just looked it up. This track uses some weird instruments. A pitched ride cymbal, an echoing glass harp, and, get this, a female choir to add a soft background texture. It's so cool to see how much thought was put into every track of this game, even some of the mid ones. Interestingly, something I haven't brought up until now is that there are actually multiple versions of every area theme in the game. The regular one when the player is fighting an enemy, and another at the end of the day. Instead of the game completely replacing the track that's playing, however, these alternate versions in the game work by simply removing or adding instruments to change the vibe of the track. The nighttime versions of every track remove the drums and replace any bombastic instruments with a soft piano melody. For the most part, this just means that the track gets a bit calmer without much noticeable change. The Navel has a pretty drastic change, as a lot of the song relies on the snare drum, but it's less of an interesting change and more of a way for the game to simply dull out the track, so it wasn't worth mentioning. However, the battle versions of each track will add in extra drums to give it a more tense tone. Obviously, this doesn't change the Navel's theme much, and the Forest of Hope only has a slight, barely noticeable adjustment. However, the Distant Springs battle theme changes the vibe of the song drastically, adding in things like a snare drum and some harsh violins. This version of the track is much better, and I think it adds to the vibe of the area that mostly has an unremarkable track. In this desolate area, when it feels like you're being watched at all times, when an enemy does make itself known, the track will show its true strengths, just like the battle you'd be dealing with at the time. The violins especially make the atmosphere tense, which isn't something that a violin is normally known for, but here, take a listen. It's definitely unique, that's for sure, but probably one of my least favorite tracks in the game, but only because it's up against some other incredible songs. Moving on to the layout, this map is essentially a small island where the ship lands, which is surrounded by one continuous body of water stretching across the map's front and back. The ship lands in the middle with access to the front of the map and the biggest section of water. The back half of the island can be accessed by simply going around the tree stump in the middle, but if you don't want to go into the water, or that is to say, if you want to bring other Pikmin types to the back of the map, you'll need to knock down these 2 stone walls as soon as you can. Bomb rocks can be found on a smaller island off to the right of the front of the map. Other than that, however, the rest of the map's front is almost entirely empty. A few ship parts can be found just off the coast, but going further in, the quantity of collectibles decreases dramatically, with only one part being held at the very edge of the water, adding on to the map's eerie vibe and providing a decent challenge since there are a ton of enemies to deal with on the way to the front of the map. There are other small islands in this giant body of water, but none are too important to us, with this island in the middle being the one key exception. More on that later. The back half of the map contains a huge cluster of parts on land and a river which leads from the pool in the front and creates a little shore in the back. The top of the tree stump can be accessed back here and is a small boss arena containing the game's second armored cannon beetle. This one actually being required to be as it has a ship part inside it. The back of the map is filled with a ton of puzzles which we'll discuss soon, but it makes the landscape extremely varied and frantic. And with such a large amount of enemies clustered into this small area, it definitely provides a nice challenge and a break from the barren vibe of the area, while not stepping too far away from that theme as most enemies here are a part of the same species, implying a sort of pack of animals all living together. Speaking of which, let's quickly discuss the final batch of enemies in the game, since after this area, all we have left to talk about is the final boss. Let's start with that pack I was just talking about. These are the spotty bullbears, biological cousins to the bulborbs back in the Forest of Hope. Like bulborbs, we have 2 different kinds here, adult and dwarf. Although, unlike bulborbs, lore-wise, it has been established that while dwarf bulborbs are not actually prepubescent bulborbs, but instead a mimicking species, dwarf bullbears are in fact the younger members of the same species, often staying in packs of 2 or 3 around their parents. Dwarf bullbears essentially act as a faster, more aggressive version of dwarf bulborbs. They can still eat only 1 Pikmin at a time, but they chew much faster and their HP is slightly higher. That being said, a direct hit on the bullbear's back will insta-kill it just like dwarf bulborbs. These guys are also much more likely to wake up their parent. It's still a rare encounter, considering you can take care of these guys really quickly, but it is worth mentioning that these guys are far more inclined to call for backup. Their adult version, the spotty bullbear, is much more formidable, working the same as bulborbs with a buff in every single aspect of their design. They can eat 5 Pikmin at a time instead of 3, they are faster, they have more HP, they shake off Pikmin faster, they deal more damage to Olimar, and while I can't exactly prove this one, even the crushing glitch is worse with these guys. When I played this game on the Wii version as a little kid, my most common interaction with this glitch would come from adult bullbears, and I feel like I'd almost never experience it when fighting a regular bulborb. But other than the Puffstool, these guys caused me the most trouble in terms of this glitch. I distinctly remember when I was little, I was replaying the game with my mom, because I, wanted to show her the magic of Pikmin. And I killed a bullbear in front of her, and she immediately pointed out that 30 Pikmin just disappeared. This was the first interaction with the crushing glitch I had in that playthrough, so naturally she was very confused, and being a little kid, I don't think I really understood it either, so I kinda just had to be like, yeah, that just happens sometimes. Honestly, the fact this glitch is made far less common in the Switch version is a miracle. If you've never played this game on anything but a Switch, then count yourself lucky. And if you've never played this game at all, then please try and play the Switch version if you can. I think the glitch is so common with this enemy because of how round the model is. It's probably more likely that Pikmin will get stuck under the edge and get pushed under the map. To kill a bullbear, you can just use the same strategy as a regular bulborb, preferably with more Pikmin this time for extra damage. Moving on to another variant of an enemy, we have the yellow Wallyhop. This enemy is a Wallyhop that's yellow. That's it. Mechanically, the 2 forms of Wallyhops don't actually differ at all from each other. Design-wise, the yellow Wallyhop is, well, yellow. But its head is also far bigger, making it look more like a large oval than a flattened circle like its counterpart. Other than that though, everything about this enemy is exactly the same, so just take everything I said before and apply it here. Interestingly enough, this concept of giving an enemy a reskin is a big thing in the series, but the alternate color palettes are always meant to represent a mechanical difference, like how the Bulbears are stronger than Bulborbs. And throughout the series, there is luckily never a simple recolor like this again. There are a ton of enemies that look and act very similar, of course, but a difference in design, however slight, always dictates a difference in mechanics. As more elemental hazards get introduced, we'll see this a ton with enemies that do the same thing but with a different hazard. Fiery Blowhog and its counterpart, the Watery Blowhog, for example. It's interesting that this is the one time in the whole series this decision was made, and it's even weirder to me that it's never been remedied to match with the current status quo of enemy redesigns. To this day, Wallyhops and Yellow Wallyhops are mechanically identical in every game. I feel like the rationale behind this decision, at least in the context of this game, is the fact that regular Wallyhops blend into cave environments and fit the vibe of the Forest Navel, but Yellow Wallyhops, being more colorful, fit the vibe of the Distant Spring better. Puffy Blowhogs, despite the name, look very different from their fiery cousins. Honestly, sometimes I forget that these enemies are related in the lore, but yeah. This is another kind of blowhog, except instead of expelling an ignitable gas, they expel high-velocity wind which can knock away Pikmin, but can't kill them. It's an annoying enemy that, while not lethal, can move extremely fast, making it hard to take out and annoying to deal with, especially when it tries to blow Pikmin off of an object they're trying to carry, or when it interrupts a fight with a Bulbear, which can lead to some devastating casualties. It's not an enemy that can be taken lightly, especially considering it cannot be swarmed. Puffy Blowhogs fly in the air, so you'll have to chase them down and throw Pikmin up to attack. With enough Pikmin, you could weigh it down and be able to swarm or disband to get extra damage in. When a Puffy Blowhog dies, it deflates like a giant balloon and won't leave behind a body. In later games it does, but even then, it's tiny and deflated. Olimar's real notes on this Blowhog actually mention that the hydrogen used to ignite Fiery Blowhog's breath is used in a Puffy Blowhog's body to help it float. Neat. I love that kind of attention to detail. Water Dumples are annoying, and not just because anytime I try to type their name in the script, it autocorrects Dumple to Dimple. Water Dumples are distant biological cousins of Bulborbs and are amphibious like blue Pikmin. They spend most of their time in the water, but can spawn out on the land and even chase you up onto it. They can eat up to 5 Pikmin at a time, and they chew extremely fast. They move rapidly and have a giant attack radius, making swarming these guys extremely risky. I found the best way is to rapidly throw Pikmin on top of them before they notice you, because once they do, it's going to be hard to aim since they'll be crawling towards you rapidly. Not only that, but Water Dumples are often found in packs of 2, 3, or even 4. So taking out one without casualties is tricky but achievable. But taking out a whole group of them almost always requires a few sacrifices. The Swooping Snitchbug is another annoying enemy, and much like the Puffy Blowhog, this guy is non-lethal. Snitchbugs float in the air using their antennas as wings. When they spot a Pikmin, they'll swoop down and pick them up, picking up a maximum of 2 at a time. They will then slam the Pikmin back down, planting them in the ground. They just serve as a distraction and can be taken out pretty quickly, with any Pikmin type, but they can be a menace when you're trying to take out something else. Well, here we are, the final enemy in the Distant Spring, the most infamous fight by far in the entire Pikmin series. The Smoky Prog. The Smoky Prog is an optional boss fight that can only appear if the player is able to make it to the Distant Spring before day 15, which isn't that hard to do. The Prog cannot move or attack until the player initiates it. In fact, remember that small island in the middle of the front pool? Well, before day 15, this ominous egg will sit in the middle, no matter what you do to it. It won't budge or do anything. If you take an army of blue Pikmin and destroy the egg, it will shatter and nothing will happen. No, to truly see what's inside this egg, the player will need to have a few Pikmin attack it, but not break it. This will cause the egg to shake for a few seconds before the Smoky Prog emerges from it. Once the Prog is awake, there is no way to avoid it until you kill it. Because, unlike other bosses, the Prog doesn't have a self-contained arena. No, this is our first and only free-roaming enemy in the original Pikmin, a concept which will be explored much later in the series. Free-roaming enemies have no limits as to where they can go, and the Smoky Prog in specific is programmed to always take the fastest route to the player's base, no matter where it is. Once it arrives at your base, it will circle around the onions, waiting for Pikmin to come out of them. If any Pikmin are currently planted in the ground, it will yell and automatically pluck them all. See, when Pikmin are planted in the ground, they are normally completely safe from death until they're plucked. This is the only enemy in the entire series which breaks this rule by plucking the Pikmin itself. But how does the Smoky Prog work? How does it kill Pikmin? Well, it doesn't outright attack you, other than when it unearths planted Pikmin. Instead, it simply walks around. But what makes it so dangerous is that its head is the only weak point on its body, so throwing Pikmin onto its head will allow you to deal damage. However, every other part of its body will instantly kill Pikmin the moment they touch it. No warning, no animation, just immediate death. Attempting to use Swarm on this boss will instantly kill your entire squad without it ever attacking. You just need to throw and hope you hit its weak spot. And even then, when it inevitably shakes the Pikmin off of its head, they have a high chance of touching the rest of the body when they fall off. It rarely ever stays still, so if you try and stand still to aim, you won't have much time before it slides over your entire party. It's a menace, but again, it's optional. It doesn't even contain a ship part, it just drops a golden pearl which will give you 100 Pikmin when you collect it. So in theory, you could get a net positive from this fight, but not by much. And is it really worth adding 90 Pikmin to the total death count? Yes, the answer is yes, it's worth it. It's interesting, because much like the Gulix and Mamuda, you could play through the whole game without ever encountering this enemy. Speaking of the Mamuda, the lore of the Smoky Prog is very weird. The game only states that it's thought to be a malformed larval Mamuda. This is one of the first instances of the game not outright telling us the lore of a creature, just giving us an in-universe theory. But even with this speculation, it's interesting to think that the most tame, non-lethal enemies in the game that actually help the player more than hurt them is related to essentially the Grim Reaper. And to unlock this boss, we have to purposefully interrupt the Smoky Prog egg, which is probably what led to this creature being malformed in the first place. It's interesting to think that just a slight interruption of the hatching process can turn such a tame creature into a monstrous weapon of mass destruction. To this day, with all the expansions to the lore of the Pikmin world, we still have no more information on how these two creatures connect and what causes such a terrifying mutation. Moving on from Eldritch Abominations, it's time to talk about the ship parts in the Distant Spring. This area has the most ship parts in the game, with a staggering 10. An entire third of the game is contained here, and for good reason. I absolutely adore the puzzles in this area. Starting with the easiest part by far, the repair-type boat can be found on a small ledge by the shore. You're required to throw blue Pikmin up and swarm them from the bottom towards the part. Super easy, just requires some creativity. Olimar's notes on this part describe it as a self-repairing mechanism within the dolphin. Naturally, it's required. Interestingly enough, Olimar comments on how excited he is to find this part because it means he won't have to fix the little glitches himself, implying that up to this point, he's been doing intense maintenance on the ship at night. Over by the island with the bomb rocks is the massage machine. This part requires you to have blue Pikmin build a bridge to allow the part to get back to base. It's also guarded by a bull bear. Infamously, even if only blue Pikmin carry this part, they won't take it through the water. They will instead wait by the bridge until it's complete, assuming it hasn't already been built. This is one of the main complaints people have towards Pikmin's AI in this game, as unlike later entries in the series, this game simply refuses to account for specific paths that Pikmin could theoretically take, especially in respect to blue Pikmin. The massage machine is funny. Obviously, it's not required to escape the planet, making this our third optional ship part. But Olimar's notes on this thing are great. Ain't no way he unironically just said, "My lumbar region has been paining me. We cannot be serious right now." The interstellar radio can be found in the far south of the map, deep into the pool area. It's the reward for defeating a puffy blowhog, and is described to be a radio which puts out a daily SOS signal. Now, no matter where you are in the game, Olimar will say that he has so little time left that the SOS signal won't make a difference, but you can find this part as early as day 5, so a big argument in the community for a long while has been that His immediate rejection of the idea is unrealistic, especially considering playthroughs where you obtain this part on day 5. Although, Pikmin 4 actually offers the explanation much later that it would take about a month for the SOS signal to reach anyone, a detail which was most likely added as a response to the discussion surrounding this small bit of dialogue. Either way, he somehow gets radio signals, as he later says, and with this being a required part despite being a radio, nothing about this thing makes sense. When you collect the part, Olimar even specifically mentions that not all parts are needed to escape the planet, which led a ton of players to believe that this was one of those not required parts. But that's not the case. Moving on to more straightforward parts, the gluon drive is literally the shell of the middle of the ship. It's a heavy part that's pretty close to the base and requires 2 bridges to be built next to a yellow Wallyhop. Another relatively easy part to get, all things considered, but wow is it annoying. Getting both bridges built in a reasonable amount of time takes a ton of blue Pikmin. It usually takes me 2 days total to get this part, as I'll normally leave some blues building the bridge while I grab some other parts nearby on my first day in this area. That being said, it is possible to get this part without building the bridges with a simple workaround. See, if you only build one bridge, you can have some Pikmin carry the part to the edge of the bridge and then whistle them back before they get stuck. This will make them bump into the gluon drive, pushing it into the water, which will let blue Pikmin carry the part around the unbuilt bridge. It's not elegant, but it can save some time if you know what you're doing. Just make sure you allocate 50 blues at least to get this part, because, save for one technicality we'll get to later, this is the heaviest ship part in the entire game, requiring at least 50 Pikmin to carry. Olimar's notes for this part say, using the cork-building metaphysical properties of gluons, this device, well, it's very scientific, and I don't fully understand it myself, but it was very expensive. To this day, I still find it very funny how little Olimar understands about his own ship. Like, there's some parts he has tons to write about, and then you get to some of the more technical stuff, and he's just like, this thingy does some important stuff and makes cool noises. The UV lamp is a fun one. It makes use of yellow Pikmin's extra throw height better than any other part of the game. See, it's blocked by this little puzzle. It requires you to walk across this small ledge and throw them up to the UV lamp right in the corner. You can either swarm your yellows, or you can throw them up first and then walk up yourself. It's a fun puzzle that grants the player our 4th optional part. In fact, Olimar's notes specifically call out that it has no other use than just being a small light, citing that it's more useful for tanning than for seeing. He even flat out says he doubts this will affect his escape at all, while most other optional parts are never explicitly stated to be unimportant, although parts like the massage machine are pretty obviously made out to be optional, even if not explicit. Alright, these next few aren't super crazy, so let's speed through them just to save some time. The Zirconium rotor can be found besides the lake past a bramble gate that's guarded by 2 yellow Wallyhops. The small area makes these guys challenging, but not unreasonable. Yet again, Olimar's comments on this part are just about him complaining about how expensive it was. Basically, nothing to discuss here. The pilot's seat just sits in a small tree stump by a pool of water. Well, I guess they can't all be winners. Not much to say here. Its function in the ship is, to the surprise of no one, the seat for the pilot. The number 2 Ionium jet requires a little puzzle in the back of the map, past a few water dumples. All you need to do is throw some blue Pikmin across a ledge and lead them over to the edge to pick it up the jet. It's the counterpart to the first jet found in the Navel. Olimar doesn't have much to say about this one. Back to the interesting stuff, the bowsprit is a great part that requires a few steps to get to. You'll need to either build a stick by the base for a bit of a shortcut, or you can maneuver past the fire geysers in the back of the map to get on top of the middle tree trunk, acting as a condensed boss arena. You'll be forced to fight an armored cannon beetle in this little arena, and once you defeat it, it'll drop the bowsprit. The path back to the ship is the real interesting part. If you took the shortcut, you'll need to cut your way back down through a bridge in Bramble Gate. If you took the long way, then you most likely already have those tasks completed. You'll want to use reds to get through the fire geysers, but once they're through the fire, the only direction that land Pikmin can take is through 3 spotty bullbears, 5 or so dwarf bullbears, and a puffy blowhog. If you've already gotten the UV lamp by this point, you've most likely defeated these enemies by now. But if you took the shortcut or just went down the side of the river, then you most likely wouldn't have been back here yet. You could defeat them like normal and have your reds take the part back the fast way, or you can run back and grab some blues to carry the part back through the river. Either way works, but I'd suggest just sucking it up and getting rid of the bullbears. Like I said, you'll have to at some point. They block your path to the UV lamp and provide a path for any non-blue Pikmin to get back to the base, so it's worth the effort for sure. Now what makes this part truly great is what Olimar has to say about it. This is the one and only part in the game that he doesn't say he bought or was bought for him. Other parts have memories associated with them for sure, but this is the only one that Olimar makes a point to say he designed himself. He's clearly very proud of his ship, especially considering how much he has to say about every little part of it. But it's nice to know that the face of it was designed specifically by him. It's a great detail that adds more character to the dolphin. And this late in the game, it emphasizes particularly that the ship is beginning to look like itself again. It's just a nice little moment that I feel gets overlooked way too often. Finally, we have the Kronos reactor, a part with one of the coolest puzzles in the game. See, it's up on a ledge that only yellow Pikmin can reach, but it's also surrounded by water. So what do we need to do? Well, this is where the one and only use of candy pop buds comes into play. See, these little things have been spread around the maps for a bit, but have never been required to use up until now. What they do is turn any Pikmin type into the color of the flower. So, using this yellow candy pop bud, we can transform our blues into yellows in order to get the part off the ledge. Then we can turn them back into blues using this blue candy pop bud to actually get the part across the water. It's not entirely obvious what to do at first, but I always like a good puzzle that makes use of multiple Pikmin types. Olimar says that this part apparently has the power to warp the space-time continuum like a giant rubber band. But, as my dear friend MJ the Shiny Hunter once said, it looks more like an AI-generated dog bowl than anything. Well, that's the last of the main areas in Pikmin. But we do still have one small thing to discuss. Just one more area, one more enemy, and one more ship part. So, let's finally take a look at the final trial is just that. It's essentially a glorified boss arena. Although, there are some other things going on here. For one thing, the music of this area is pretty great. The theme itself feels like it's constantly contradicting itself. You have the upbeat, hopeful nature of the early game, and the chaotic, natural vibe of the late game, not working in harmony, but using contrary motion to emphasize the point of the area. It feels like Olimar's thoughts and hopes are overcoming the suffocating feeling of dread that the game has given him so far. It's a great way to make the music feel impactful and dramatic, while still feeling like a Pikmin song. The area itself is small, requiring a few multi-type puzzles to be completed before leading into the final boss arena. You'll have to swarm reds over some fire geysers to push a box out of the way, you'll need to get some blues to build a bridge over to a reinforced wall, and you'll need yellows to get some bomb rocks to destroy that reinforced wall. Once all of that's done, there's one final bridge that leads to a path that the box revealed. And when you build it, you'll be met with a simple bramble gate, leading into a very obvious boss arena. That being said, you can walk on the outskirts of the arena to avoid activating the final boss, allowing you to reach this bramble gate in the back of the map, which leads to a ton of bomb rocks, which will be very helpful for the upcoming fight. Speaking of which, let's take a look at our final enemy of Pikmin 1, the Emperor Bulblax. The Emperor Bulblax is the final boss of Pikmin. It's the largest enemy in the game, and can both eat and crush Pikmin. Its weak point is its entire face, while the rest of its body is unable to be damaged. It can be stunned if you force it to eat a bomb rock, which can be done by either sacrificing a yellow Pikmin, or by timing a throw at just the right moment to get a yellow to throw the bomb itself, but the best strategy is just to have it eat yellows holding bombs, and then use reds to get damage in while it's stunned. This is a really difficult fight, all things considered, but it isn't awful or anything. Lore-wise, it's just a really old grub dog. We'll learn more about this enemy later in the series, but for now, there's not much to discuss. The final ship part is the Secret Safe, an optional part contained in the Emperor Bulblax, which means that the final trial is entirely optional, but of course, if you want the best ending, you'll have to do it. The Secret Safe is quite literally just a piggy bank according to Olimar, so yeah, not vital to the ship in any way. Funny enough, this part normally weighs 40 Pikmin, however, in the Japanese release of the GameCube version, it actually weighed 85 Pikmin, hence the technicality I mentioned earlier. In literally every other release of the game, it weighs 40. And that's the final trial. And by extension, that's all the areas covered. All in all, I adore Pikmin's level design. They really nailed exactly what makes this series special right from the first game in the series. And speaking of what makes this series special, it's finally time to take a look at one of the best parts of this game as an experience: the story. Pikmin 1 has an extremely simple story. You crash, you collect 30 ship parts, you leave, or you fail. But it's the execution of this story that makes it so great. Olimar has comments for pretty much every situation in the game, and it's cool to see the story through his perspective because of the premise of an alien planet he's discovering for the first time. For example, one of the most well-known facts of the series is how Pikmin got their name in-universe, that being that Olimar thought they looked like carrots, so he named them after his favorite brand of carrot, Pick. It's little things like that that make the story so campy and interesting. Every single creature and location in this game is canonically named by Olimar, and he always has a reason for naming things the way he does. Bulborbs are named after his dog, Bulby, and the biological family they belong to, the Grub Dog family, is named that because of this connection. It's such a unique method of storytelling, getting to see an entire planet be named by one person. And, of course, in later games when more people discover the planet, they end up using Olimar's names. So, this establishing story is not only great on its own, but it does so much to give us a small snippet of a large universe without overwhelming the audience. So, let's take a closer look at the story of Pikmin by examining each of its main routes: the bad ending, the neutral ending, and the happy ending. Not much story really happens in the middle of the game, or so you would think. But one of the main ways this game tells its narrative is through a mechanic called Today's Results. We've covered this briefly, but it essentially just lets you know exactly what you did during an in-game day. But it also gives the player a great little end-of-day note section in which Olimar talks about something related to where you are in the game. These notes give us important information about enemies and gameplay mechanics, most of which we've already covered in this video. But some of these give us important story details that I haven't had the chance to cover yet. So, using these as a basis, I'm going to go ahead and analyze the entire story of this game beat for beat for each main route the player can take. That being said, I'm not going to cover all 71 of these voyage logs because, like I said, a lot of these give us information that I've already covered. I'll just try and focus on new stuff here. The bad ending of Pikmin comes about when the player is unable to collect enough ship parts to escape the planet. But what if I told you there was actually a worse ending than even that? The ending itself is the same, however, if you decide to never leave the impact site and only collect 1 out of 30 ship parts, the notes at the end of each day will progressively get darker. This is because the game has a set list of 28 voyage logs, which will appear in a specific order as filler logs if you aren't able to accomplish anything of note that day. Meaning that most of these are impossible to see in a standard playthrough. See, most voyage logs have a trigger to be seen. You'll get a certain one for discovering yellow Pikmin, one for discovering blues, one for discovering a new area, etc. But if you never do any of those things, then these 28 voyage logs will occur in this exact order. I'm going to skip some of these that aren't relevant, but most of them are, so let's take a look. 2 days since impact. When I see the Pikmin engaged in fierce battle with the other creatures of this world, I often grow uneasy, wondering why they never attack me. Could it be they actually view me as a parental figure? A strange, disturbing thought. 3 days since impact. I wonder if I shall ever be able to escape from this world. How much suffering must I endure before I can finally see my family back home again? Still, when my heart grows too heavy, I take comfort in my efforts. I will get home, or I will expire trying. Quick aside, but this sketch of Olimar's family is the only visualization we get of them or Bulby in this game. Most people will see this during a regular playthrough since it's so early in the list, which I think is intentional to give a visualization of what Olimar is fighting for. Just a thought. 4 days since impact. The creatures of this planet breathe a deadly poisonous gas, oxygen. At present, my spacesuit can filter the oxygen out, but if the batteries for my life support system should fail, I shudder to think about it. This log is extremely interesting because combine this with the man-made objects and malformed creatures, it becomes extremely evident that this planet is Earth. Not only that, but it's interesting to see that Olimar's species is actually completely allergic to oxygen. Not a poisonous form of it like some people incorrectly assume. No, he specifically states a deadly poisonous gas called oxygen. Another interesting bit of lore. 6 days since impact. I wonder if these Pikmin were waiting for me to arrive. No, not necessarily me, but an alien being like me who could fight alongside them. On this planet, they are a weak species, but maybe they see that they can use the power of an alien brain to climb to the top of the natural order. Such ideas make me wonder if it isn't I who is being used by them. 8 days since impact. This is an ever-surprising ecosystem. What has caused this planet's vegetation to grow to such gigantic proportions? In comparison to the Pikmin and the other creatures of this planet, the scale of the plant life here seems inexplicable. Perhaps, long ago, creatures of incomprehensible size walked the surface of this planet. Just imagine. Yet another great piece of evidence pointing to this planet being Earth, specifically a post-apocalyptic Earth, or even just at some point after humans have gone extinct. Because remember, Olimar and the Pikmin are the size of a quarter. So, of course, humans would be gigantic creatures. 11 days since impact. My people were born out of the sea of stars to come down to Hakatate, and when we complete our lives, we return to the great ocean of stars. But since these Pikmin come from the depths of the soil, surely to the soil they shall return. How very poetic. While it is all alien to me, the basic premise is universally beautiful. This is a great log because, obviously, Olimar's connecting to the Pikmin on a personal level, even though they're alien to him, but it also shows Hakatate's culture, which isn't really something we get to see in the rest of the series, which is nice. 13 days since impact. At first glance, the Pikmin have such innocent faces, but this is misleading. They can actually be surprisingly whimsical. After leaving the group, they dig up plants on their own and frolic about, sometimes never returning to the onion. When I find none following me, I begin to worry. I must pay careful attention to their movements. So far, everything has just been small lore drops or gameplay tips. This one, of course, letting the player know that Pikmin can be left behind. Remember, these are set to play whenever there's nothing else to show, so at this point, it could still be someone just moving slowly. But as we'll see soon, this game starts to know that if you're still getting these notes, you're likely not going to beat the game. And that's when Pikmin as a narrative, or at least this version of it, begins to show its true colors. 15 days since impact. Looking from this planet into the skies above, I see a pale white moon floating overhead. It brings to mind memories of the moon from back home. I bet that even now, my wife and children are sitting at home, gazing up at our pale red moon. Hang on, dear ones, your Olimar will return someday. Aside from being a little silly, this log actually gives us some fun insight into the world outside of this single planet, telling us more about Hakatate and that it has a pale red moon, a detail I constantly forget. Plus, more fuel to the Earth theory, white moon and all that. 16 days since impact. When I am surrounded by legions of Pikmin, I always picture the face of my boss, the head of the pilot union. He was always so sharp-tongued with his orders, but I imagine he must have felt much the way I do now. It's funny how a change in perspective can bring with it a deeper understanding of others. 17 days since impact. I can't help but hear a slow hissing sound inside my head. It seems that the stress is causing the last of my hair to fall out. My wife always warned me to not let the little things bother me, to prepare for the bigger things instead. Very well, I shall heed her sage words. This shall be the last time I count my precious strands. 1, 2. And here it is, the beginning of the end. If the player has seen this message, it means they've spent the last 16 days without accomplishing anything. At this point, the game knows that the player will probably lose this run, but even so, it's still not that hard to get something done. The big difference in these logs moving forward is that the game knows that if you're seeing them, not only are you on your way to losing, but you're intentionally doing as little as possible. Or you're just genuinely that bad at the game. So here, we'll start to see a shift in Olimar's mindset to compensate for the fact that we aren't making progress. Now we're gonna start to see him give up hope entirely. 18 days since impact. Today's dinner is instant space noodles once again. It feels as if I have been eating it forever, and I never liked it much to begin with. Certainly I did not want to drain my savings, but perhaps I should not have budgeted so tightly. How I long for my wife's home cooking. 19 days since impact. I cannot seem to sleep. At night I am overcome with uneasiness. I am the only one to have ever stood on this planet. The Pikmin follow my orders, but frankly I have no idea what they could be thinking. Ah, yes, it brings the faces of my children to mind. May I have courage. 20 days since impact. I've been preoccupied with my own problems, but I am certain that my worries pale beside my family's fear for my safety. I'm always amazed at how much my children have changed when I return from a lengthy trip. Even with their father gone, the children grow. When I return, I shall load up my family and take them with me for a change. I love this log so much. It's such great characterization for Olimar that fits with his pre-established care for his family. But this time, it's twisted into something more sinister. Technically speaking, it is still possible to beat the game at this point, even if the player spent the last 20 days doing nothing. But that requires a ton of skill that the average player simply wouldn't have, especially on a first playthrough. Olimar has begun to lose hope entirely at this point. All he cares about is his family, so he deludes himself that he will see them again, or rather, that they will see him again. He's such a selfless protagonist that he doesn't fear for his own life. Rather, he's petrified of the future where he never comes back home, where his children grow up without a father. Future where it's impossible for anyone to know what happened to him. Death is the least of his fears. 23 days since impact. My daughter, who was always so sweet in her youth, has become so precautious lately. I can only imagine how many headaches she has caused her mother in my absence. What with her parentage, I am certain she will grow into a beautiful woman. Now it's truly over. Notice the wording in this log. He refers to his daughter growing up under her mother's parentage, not his own. He's certain she will grow into a beautiful woman, but he makes no remark about seeing her grow up. He knows he will die here. 25 days since impact. I have been stranded on this planet for quite some time, and I have grown used to my life here. At times, I even find it quite bearable. I know that as soon as I return, I'll once again be subjected to daily ridicule by my despicable boss. If only I could be a Pikmin. No, I must not think such thoughts. I have a family. I will not give up. Ever. 26 days since impact. At this point, I no longer care what happens. Surely not even a last-minute push can guarantee my success. Now that I think about it, my wife always said I gave up too easily. What does she know anyway? When did she become a licensed psychiatrist? Now I'm upset. I guess I'll just go to sleep early tonight. 27 days since impact. I suppose I have done well to get by without much motivation. I have made it this far without any hope. I must do all I can with the time I have remaining. Vigilance, Olimar, vigilance! The next log was initially only in the Japanese version of the game, but was later added back into all versions for the Nintendo Switch port. It reads as follows. 28 days since impact. I am so very tired. Day 29 will always have the same log no matter what, just saying that he will attempt to leave the planet at the end of the day tomorrow, even without all 30 parts. But obviously in this route, there is no point. Olimar is unable to escape far past the planet's atmosphere, and well... Weird lore implications aside, wow, this is sad. This version of the narrative is a tale of a man slowly losing his mind and his hope. He gives up on his family, his morality, and his life. It's depressing, and it's definitely one of Nintendo's darkest stories, especially at the time. But to discuss the elephant in the room, no, I don't have an explanation for this. Yet. I will say, Pikmin 4 gives us a ton more information as to what Olimar becoming a Pikmin means, but for now, it doesn't matter. This video is way too long as is, so let's focus on the story itself. The bad ending gives us a ton more insight into Olimar as a character, and I hope it's clear now why I think this is Nintendo's best protagonist. It's clear so much thought went into his character. He's not perfect, he's not even really a hero, but he has so much depth to him. Depth which most of Nintendo's target audience won't even be able to connect with, but at the same time, I feel like Olimar is the perfect protagonist for a story like this. Pikmin is essentially a one-man play. The story, the dialogue, the emotion, the themes, the development, it all stems from Olimar. And it works because he isn't Mario. Nintendo's protagonists follow a general rule of being blank slates. They aren't given too much character, because they're meant to be a connection between the game and the player. Even characters with an actual story are often kept intentionally silent so the player can see themselves in the scenarios of the game. You don't need to be a 4'10 plumber with a mustache to see yourself in Mario, because he's portrayed as the generic hero. And there's nothing wrong with that. By keeping protagonists silent, Nintendo effectively lets the player put themselves in the world. But, on the contrary, Olimar refuses to shut the fuck up. It's hard to see yourself in Olimar, but that opens the gates for him to be more relatable, because he feels like a person with actual motives, which makes his complete degradation of all drive to see his family again all the more tragic, especially when you consider it's your fault. Olimar's mentality in the narrative directly parallels the actions you take during gameplay, which is so cool to see because it shows how video games as a medium can tell stories that no other medium can. But enough of the depressing ending. Let's take a brief look at the neutral ending. This one is not that interesting. Olimar just simply leaves the planet without all 30 parts. It's kinda hard to get this ending without trying to, considering only 5 parts are actually optional. So you'll probably just either get all 30, and if you don't, chances are you'll likely miss a required part. But either way, this ending is quite underwhelming. There's no closure to the story, so we can just assume Olimar made it back safely, and the Pikmin just kept living. The best ending, on the other hand, is so sweet. After collecting all 30 parts, the ship will finally be complete, but as Olimar takes off, he takes a moment to say goodbye to the Pikmin. After Olimar leaves, the Pikmin attack a Bulborb without his command. What's great about this moment is that we get to see not only the growth of Olimar as a character, but we finally get some closure for the Pikmin themselves. You know, the guys the game is named after? When Olimar arrives, the Pikmin are all but extinct, but through the course of the game, Olimar is able to teach them how to fend for themselves and organize to survive. It's so sweet to see real development through zero dialogue. The game ends with Olimar blasting away as dozens of colors of onions float up to see him off, foreshadowing the other Pikmin types we'll see later in the series, and, by the way, some of these colors still haven't been used to this day. I love how complete this ending feels, while also setting up the rest of the series, adding intrigue that makes people want to see more Pikmin games. It's great. Pikmin has a very simple story, but it's such a great one. It's unique, it uses the medium of video games well, and it
Still has so much emotion behind it.
To me, Pikmin's narrative has one central theme: hope. Losing hope, gaining hope, and finding hope in an environment that strives to deprive you of it. It's no mistake that the most iconic area in this game is called the Forest of Hope. I could go on for another day talking about little bits of dialogue and how every little thing adds to the major theme of hope, but I need to stop talking at some point, and I think I've made my point enough here. Nintendo made something truly special with this game. It's short, it's sweet, and clearly a test project, but I believe that they accidentally made something perfect. The gameplay, story, mechanics, world, enemies, characters, environment, and music all combine to create a perfectly refined experience that I adore so much. It was so fun to take an in-depth look at one of my favorite games of all time. And after all of this analysis, I think I can confidently say why this game connects with me so much. It's the idea of discovery. This is a short game, but it's a game that's malleable. No matter who you are, no matter how many times you've played this game, there's always something new to find. Some new way to beat the game faster, some new pieces of dialogue you didn't notice before. Or, in a broad sense, just the concept of discovering the planet alongside Olimar. It's so fun to explore a new Pikmin area for the first time, to solve a puzzle, get multiple parts in a single day, make a mad dash to get the last Pikmin before sunset, and so much more. Pikmin 1 nailed a formula that it created, and in doing so, Nintendo was able to accomplish something special with what was meant to be a test run. They accidentally created a game that's about as perfect as you can get. Yes, there are issues, but it's easy to put those faults aside to look at the product as a whole and see the masterfully crafted experience. It's not too long, but it doesn't leave you craving more. It's a perfect emotional narrative with a simple premise, a masterful execution, and a definitive ending that's satisfying, but also open-ended. Combine that with how the gameplay masterfully immerses the player through tight design and clever mechanics not seen in the industry before, and with how the incredible soundtrack exasperates the already established tone, then you're left with an extremely satisfying experience that inspires hope in the people who can see it through. Everything about the original Pikmin combines to create, in my opinion, a perfect video game. And all it took was a simple idea, a push to create something new, a few translation errors, one extremely passionate team, and of course, discovery.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. As I said at the beginning, and as I've made clear in community posts and such, this is part 1 of a 4-part series. I'd just like to clarify, this is the only video where I'll be talking about Pikmin 1, at least to this extent. Part 1 is Pikmin 1, Part 2 is Pikmin 2, Part 3 is Pikmin 3, Part 4 is Pikmin 4. It's an entire series retrospective, and each part will be about a different Pikmin game. So, they're going to be each their own individual retrospectives like this, but they're all going to connect over, like, this narrative of discovery, and, that's kind of how I imagined it, and that's how I'm writing it, and I'm very excited about it. Kind of just speaking off the cuff right now, I just wanted to have a little, unscripted discussion before I wrap up the video. First things first, it's been 3 months since I uploaded. This is what I've been doing, this video. It's been a lot of work. I'm very proud with how it came out. Very, very proud. I'm actually recording this section just an hour or two before I'm scheduled to upload the video. So, yeah, I'm super excited to see what you guys think about it later today. And I can't wait to continue the series. That being said, this was a lot of work, and I'm gonna, take a chill pill for a bit before I do the Pikmin 2 video. But, the better this video does, the more motivated I'll be to start working on that. But for the time being, I'm gonna try and get back to regularly scheduled uploads, stuff like that. I know that I have another video idea that I'd like to get out in December. It's going to be a smaller video. If I run out of time, it's not that big of a deal. I can get it out in January. But I think that's going to be a fun one. Just a simple one, And in January, or just, generally at the beginning of the year, I'd like to do another video, just kind of giving an update on all of the projects I'm associated with, and, where I stand on everything. And just sort of like a little sit down in front of the camera, unscripted, let me talk to you guys kind of thing. I'm not sure what that's going to look like until we get there. I feel like that kind of video has been overdue at this point, so I want to get that, going in January. So, all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. This was such a fun project to do, and I hope that the wait was worth it. And I'll be back to making actual content soon. So, yeah. See ya when I see ya.